What's the worst movie you've ever seen in your entire life? Well, let me explain it to you. They have been cited by a variety of notable critics in varying media sources as being among the worst films ever made. Examples of such sources include Metacritic, Roger Ebert's list of most hated films, the Golden Turkey Awards, Leonard Maltin's Movie Guide, Rotten Tomatoes, pop culture writer Nathan Rabin's My World of Flops, the Stinker's Bad Movie Awards, the cult TV series Mystery Science Theater 3000 alongside three of its spin-offs, and the Golden Raspberry Awards, aka the Razzies. Generally, they're feature-length films that are commercial and/or artistic in nature, professionally or independently produced, and released in cinemas, then on home video, and streaming as well. I'm LJ Network, and here we go with this feature-length documentary and the first installment in this series I call the Considered the Worst series about why absolutely everyone hates these types of movies, called Movies Considered the Worst. It's going to be a wild ride, so grab some popcorn and a drink, then sit back, relax, and enjoy this documentary. I have to cover a lot of worst movies that have been made over the past 90 years in this one, so it's split into 10 different chapters, which consist of those decades. Now, where do we begin? How about we shall start off with the 1930s, and there's just three of them released between 1934 and 1938. Maniac is a pre-code exploitation horror film directed by Dwayne Esper. The story is a loose adaptation of the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Black Cat, and follows a vaudeville impersonator who becomes an assistant to a mad scientist. Promoted as a documentary on mental illness, Maniac was criticized for its gratuitous footage of women undressing and for plagiarizing horror sequences from the 1922 silent film Haxan. Danny Perry believes that Maniac is the worst film ever made, and Charlie Jane Anders of Gawker Media's IO9 described it as possibly the worst movie in history. Rotten Tomatoes placed Maniac on its list of movies so bad they're unmissable. Vanity Fair included the film on its list of the 20 worst movies ever, and it is featured in John J.B. Wilson's book, The Official Rising Movie Guide, Enjoying the Best of Hollywood's Worst. Reefer Madness is a 1936 American exploitation film and propaganda work revolving around the melodramatic events that ensue when high school students are lured by pushers to smoke cannabis and consequently become addicted and involved in various crimes such as a hit-and-run accident, manslaughter, murder, attempted rape, and descent into madness, association with organized crime, and suicide. Pacific Standard wrote that Reefer Madness was one of the first films ever to be considered transcendently bad, and Leonard Maltin has called it the granddaddy of all worst movies. Las Vegas City Life named it the worst ever runner-up to Plan 9 from Outer Space, and News.com.au considered it a disastrous flop-turned-cult classic due to its terrible acting and exaggerated drug-addictive stereotypes. Natalia Yamato of the Daily Dot included Reefer Madness on her list of the best worst movies, writing that it may be one of the worst movies of all time for the fact that it accomplished the exact opposite of its intended goal by becoming a cult classic among stoners. Leafly's Dante Jordan also wrote that it may be the worst movie of all time, criticizing its many inaccuracies regarding marijuana use and calling it easily one of the most uncreative and tone-deaf pieces of anti-cannabis propaganda. The Terror of Tiny Town, directed by Sam Newfield and produced by Jed Buell, remains the only musical western with an all-dwarf cast. The film was pulled from obscurity as a camp classic after appearing in college and midnight screenings in the early 1970s. In 1978, it was included in Michael Medved's book, The 50 Worst Films of All Time, and has since been listed as one of the worst films ever made by Flavor Wire, Rotten Tomatoes, and the Golden Turkey Awards. Melvin DeFleur referred to it as perhaps the worst film of all time, and critic Gabriel Richard listed it as the worst film ever made, stating not only is it pretty terrible, but Tiny Town is also pretty endearing. In 1986, The Terror of Tiny Town was the first film featured on Cannes Film Festival, a late-night television show featuring the worst movies ever made. This is our next decade, and both of them were released in 1948. The Babe Ruth Story is a 1948 baseball film biography of Babe Ruth, starring William Bendix, Claire Trevor, and Sam Levine. The New York Times describes it as the Plan 9 from outer space of baseball biopics. It was rushed into release while Ruth was still alive. One infamous scene features Ruth promising a dying child that he will hit 2 home runs. The child is subsequently cured of his ailments after Ruth delivers on the promise. Baseball Hall of Famer Ted Williams believed it to be the worst movie he had ever seen. The Washington Times stated that it stands as possibly the worst movie ever made. The Spokesman Review included the film on its list of the worst films of all time, while Paul Newberry of the Associated Press wrote that the film's place on nearly every list of the worst movies ever made was with good reason. Newsday's Jack Matthews similarly wrote that The Babe Ruth Story was what many people consider to be the worst sports movie of all time. It was also called one of the worst sports films ever, each by Newsday and the AV Club, and called one of the worst biopics by Moviefone and Spike. Entertainment writer Michael Sauter included the film in his book, The Worst Movies of All Time, and Leonard Maltin called it perfectly dreadful. No Orchids for Miss Blandish, a British gangster film adapted from the 1939 novel by James Hadley Chase, received a very hostile reception from the press. For that time, this was mainly due to the film's high level of sexual and violent content, but also because its attempt to portray Americans using a largely British cast was seen as unconvincing. The British Film Journal Monthly Film Bulletin called it the most sickening exhibition of brutality, perversion, sex, and sadism ever to be shown on a cinema screen. The Sunday Express film reviewer called No Orchids for Miss Blandish the worst film I have ever seen. The Australian newspaper The Age also gave a harsh review. No Orchids for Miss Blandish is not only a disgrace to the studio that made it, but it also reflects on the British industry as a whole. The entire production is unpardonable. Cliff Goodwin, discussing No Orchids for Miss Blandish's initial reception, notes it was unanimously dubbed the worst film ever made. Later reviews of the film were equally anti-pathetic. No Orchids for Miss Blandish was described by British film reviewer Leslie Halliwell as a hilariously awful gangster film, one of the worst films ever made. Leonard Maltin's classic movie guide states that No Orchids for Miss Blandish aspires to be a Hollywood film noir and misses by a mile. That's our next decade, and there's 5 of them released between 1953 and 1957. Here we go! Glen or Glenda starred Ed Wood as Glen, a transvestite who cross-dresses as Glenda. Wood also directed the film. After a dream sequence, Glen undergoes psychotherapy to help cure him of his transvestism. Leonard Maltin wrote that Glen or Glenda was worse than Wood's later Plan 9 from Outer Space and considered it possibly the worst movie ever made. Julian Allen of Reversed Shot similarly wrote that it was widely considered to be an atrocity and the most catastrophic failure of Wood's singularly bad career. Richard Barrios described Glen or Glenda as one of the funniest and worst movies ever made. Robot Monster is a science fiction film produced and directed by Phil Tucker and originally shot and exhibited in 3D. Its title character, which is a man in a gorilla suit wearing what looks like a diving helmet sprouting TV antenna, was given the Most Ridiculous Monster in Screen History award in the Golden Turkey Awards. It was also featured in the Book of Lists 10 Worst Movies list, the 50 Worst Films of All Time, and Michael Sauter's book, The Worst Movies of All Time. Robot Monster was featured in an episode of the movie-mocking TV show Mystery Science Theater 3000, as well as Cannes Film Festival. The film is remembered fondly by horror novelist Stephen King, who quotes, and agrees with, a review in Castle of Frankenstein magazine, certainly among the finest terrible movies ever made, and one of the most laughable Poverty Row quickies. Chris Barsanti in the Sci-Fi Movie Guide writes, Robot Monster gives Plan 9 from Outer Space a run as the worst movie of all time. Howard Hughes funded The Conqueror, an epic film featuring John Wayne as Mongolian chieftain Genghis Khan and the red-headed Susan Hayward as a Tartar princess. The movie was filmed near St. George, Utah, downwind from a nuclear testing range in Nevada, and is often blamed for the cancer deaths of many of the cast and crew, including Hayward, Wayne, Angus Moorhead, Pedro Armendariz, and director Dick Powell. In addition to filming near the testing range, truckloads of the red sands were transported back to the studios for interior scenes, and by 1980, 91 of the 220 cast and crew members had been diagnosed with cancer. The film made the 10 worst list in the Book of Lists, appears in Michael Sawdust' The Worst Movies of All Time, and was among those listed in the 50 Worst Films of All Time. Additionally, the Aldergrove Star described The Conqueror as the worst ever made, and Complex listed it as the worst biopic ever made. The Guardian called the choice of Wayne for Khan, a role originally written for Marlon Brando, one of the worst casting decisions of all time. Wayne lamented taking the role, stating, "Don't make an ass of yourself trying to play parts you are not suited for." The Daily Telegraph writes, by absolutely every conceivable metric, financially, critically, historically, ethnically, and even body count, it will come to be known as one of the biggest disasters in cinematic history. Rolling Stone described the film as the worst decision in movie history. Hughes, one of the world's wealthiest people at the time, had previously produced the successful dramatic films Hell's Angels, Scarface, and The Outlaw. After viewing The Conqueror, Hughes bought every existing print for $12 million and refused to let the film be seen on TV until 1974, reportedly out of the guilt over the decision to shoot at such a hazardous location. This was the last film Hughes produced. Fire Maidens from Outer Space is a low-budget British space opera film about a group of astronauts visiting an all-female society on a moon of Jupiter. This film developed a negative reputation for its poor special effects. Leslie Hallowell described Fire Maidens from Outer Space as a strong contender for the title of the worst movie ever made, with diaphanously clad English gals striking embarrassed poses against cardboard sets. British film historian I.Q. Hunter included it in his list of candidates for the worst British film ever made. The DVD Talk website's review claimed it may be among the worst ever professionally produced science fiction films. Paul Welsh of the Borehamwood and Elm Street Times wrote that it was probably the worst film ever produced. In his book Operation Hollywood, How the Pentagon Shapes and Censors the Movies, David L. Robb wrote that the film's director Simon Roth is widely regarded as one of the worst filmmakers of all time, adding that out of the 3 films he made, the worst was Fire Maidens from Outer Space, which is often cited as one of the 10 worst movies ever made. Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space, a science fiction film about aliens resurrecting the dead, was labelled the worst film ever by the Golden Turkey Awards in 1980. Wood had shot only a small amount of unrelated footage featuring top-billed star Bela Lugosi before Lugosi's death. Wood incorporated the footage into the film and cast Tom Mason as Lugosi's body double. Mason, a personal acquaintance of Wood, bore little resemblance to Lugosi and played his scenes holding the character's cape in front of his face. Although Golden Turkey Awards author Michael Medved credits Lugosi's top billing with its enduring legacy, The Independent listed various other shortcomings. A UFO dangling in the sky has been variously said to be either a car hubcap or a paper plate. Actors read from scripts on their lap, sound microphones wobble in and out of shot. Fake trees and cemetery headphones wobble as the actors brush past them. Characters go into scenes when it's nighttime and leave 5 minutes later into daylight. The plot itself appears to be the product of insanity. Emmanuel Levy notes the film has been dubbed the epitome of so bad it's good cinema and has gained a cult following since appearing in the Golden Turkey Awards. My Year of Flops author Nathan Rabin wrote that it's hard to overstate the role Plan 9 from Outer Space and its eccentric creator have played in the birth and evolution of bad movie culture. Plan 9 was the original best worst movie. BBC writer Nicholas Barber wrote that it stands as the epitome of cinematic awfulness, and that's why so many people love it. Glenn Kelly of RogerEbert.com and the Radio Times Guide to Films each described it as the worst movie ever made, and IGN wrote, Plan 9 from Outer Space was the undisputed best worst movie ever made for decades until films like Troll 2 and The Room got notorious, and it's still a legitimate contender. It holds a 66% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 38 reviews, with a consensus stating that it is justly celebrated for its staggering ineptitude. Phil Hall of Film Thread contends that the film is far too entertaining to be considered as the very worst film ever made, and Kim Newman states that the worst thing you can say about a film is that it's boring, and Plan 9 is a fairly entertaining movie. Although Flavor Wire included it on its list of the 50 worst movies ever made, writer Jason Bailey described the Golden Turkey Awards' assessment of it as a label that stuck, and opined that he did not think it was even Wood's worst film. Likewise, John Wood of The Advocate goes as far as to call it the ultimate cult flick, and Video Hound's Complete Guide to Cult Flicks and Trash Pick states, in fact the film has become so famous for its own badness that it's now beyond criticism. Barber credits Plan 9's cult following to the film having some halfway decent elements, such as the film's title and screen presence of actors Todd Johnson and Maila Nurmi, while film historian Rodney F. Hill considers the film to be a campy, cold masterpiece with a minimalist, avant-garde aesthetic. Next decade, we've got 7 of them released between 1964 and 1968. The science fiction and horror film The Creeping Terror was directed, produced, and edited by Vic Savage. The movie is about a large slug-like alien that lands on Earth and terrorizes a small town in California. The film is memorable for its use of some bargain basement effects. Stock footage of a rocket launch played in reverse to depict the landing of an alien spacecraft, and the monster appears to be composed of a length of shag carpet draped over several actors. Notably, the creature's victims inexplicably stand perfectly still as the slow-moving monster approaches them. ComingSoon.net declared it widely considered the worst picture ever made, calling Plan 9 from Outer Space a bona fide magnum opus compared to The Creeping Terror. Montreal Gazette and Dread Central also report that it has a reputation as being one of the worst films ever made. The film was featured in the Golden Turkey Awards, and its follow-up book, Son of Golden Turkey Awards. Mystery Science Theater 3000 featured The Creeping Terror in its 6th season, and British film magazine Total Film included it on its list of the 66 worst films ever made. A documentary directed by Pete Schwerman about the making of the film, The Creep Behind the Camera, was released in 2014. The sci-fi movie Santa Claus Conquers the Martians was the creation of TV director Nicholas Webster. Because Martian children only get to see Santa Claus on TV signal speed from Earth, their parents decide to abduct Santa to make them happy. The film was criticized for its oddity and poor special effects. It is also known for starring a very young Pia Zadora. BBC critic Nick Cramp described it as possibly the worst film ever made. The film is cited on the 10 worst list in the Book of Lists and in the 50 worst films of all time. It has been featured in Mystery Science Theater 3000, Cannes Film Festival, RiffTrax, and Cinematic Titanic, thus making this the only film to be featured in the MST3K trilogy. The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies is a 1964 American monster movie written and directed by Ray Dennis Steckler. Steckler also starred in the film, billed under the pseudonym Cash Flag. In the film, 3 friends visit a carnival and stumble onto a group of occultists and disfigured monsters. Produced on a $38,000 budget, much of it takes place at the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California, which resembles Brooklyn's Coney Island. The film was billed as the first monster musical, beating out The Horror of Party Beach by a mere month in release date. The music critic Lester Baines wrote an appreciative 1973 essay about Incredibly Strange Creatures, in which he tries to explain and justify the movie's value. This flick doesn't just rebel against or even disregard standards of taste and art. In the universe inhabited by this movie with a very long name, such things as standards and responsibility have never been heard of. It is this lunar purity which largely imparts to the film its classic stature. Like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and very few others, it will remain as an artifact in years to come to which scholars and searchers for the truth can turn and say, this was trash! The 2004 DVD, The 50 Worst Movies Ever Made, listed this film as the worst film of all time. Time Out and Flavor Wire included it on their respective worst film lists. Monster A Go-Go began as Terror at Half Day by Bill Rebane. The production ran out of money and the film was abandoned. Herschel Gordon Lewis, who reportedly needed a second feature to compose a double bill, purchased and completed it for a minimal amount of money. Several of the film's actors were unable to return, so Lewis simply replaced their parts with new characters who mysteriously appear and fill the roles of the missing characters. One of the actors Lewis managed to rehire had gained weight, gone bald, and grown a goatee, so Lewis recast him as the brother of the original character. The picture consists mostly of lengthy dialogue sequences concerning the apparent mutation of an astronaut into a monster, portrayed by the 231cm tall Henry Hyde. Poor audio quality makes much of the dialogue unintelligible, and when the film is overexposed, several characters' faces appear as bright, white, glowing circles. During the climax of the movie, as soldiers prepare to confront the mutated astronaut, he abruptly vanishes and the narrator informs the audience there was no monster, and that the astronaut has, in fact, been in the Atlantic Ocean the entire time. NJ.com notes that many cinemaphiles consider it to be the worst film of all time, including the film's original director, Rebane. Matt Brunson of Film Frenzy agrees with its designation as one of the worst films ever made, stating it belongs in the exalted pantheon of immortal atrocities like Plan 9 from Outer Space, Robot Monster, and Manos, The Hands of Fate. Meanwhile, MovieWeb writer B. Alan Orange believes it to be the second worst movie ever made, after Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2. It was also featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, where writer Paul Chaplin called the dialogue garbled beyond recognition, and declared it to be the worst movie they ever featured on the program. Total Film later included on its list of the worst films ever made. The low-budget horror film Manos, The Hands of Fate, made by El Paso insurance and fertilizer salesman Hal P. Warren, concerns a vacationing family kidnapped by a polygamous cult of pageants. The film was conceived after Warren bet Academy Award-winning screenwriter Sterling Silverfant that anyone can make a horror movie. Warren was convinced by the film's cinematographer and stunt coordinator that most of its glaring mistakes could be fixed in a Dallas post-production studio, when in reality, the two wanted to quickly wrap the production because they were not being paid. Several technical goofs made it into the film, including scenes filmed out of focus, a marking slate being seen in one shot. Did you guys spot that? The scarf on the female lead's head disappearing and reappearing, and an insect bumping the camera lens. The film was shot with a camera that could not record sound and had a 32-second maximum shot length. All dialogue was later dubbed by Warren and 4 others, including a grown woman who dubbed the voice for a 7-year-old girl.
I take care of the place while the master is away.
We only want to know where Valley Lodge is.
Which way do we go? There is no way out of here. It will be dark soon. There is no way out of here.
No way out?
Manos opens with 9 minutes of monotonous driving scenes reportedly intended to be overlaid with opening credits that were never added. The movie includes dialogue spoken while all characters are facing away from the camera, a character complaining about it getting dark while the sun is brightly shining, and the character Torgo, a satyr with overly large thighs that 3 women attempt to massage to death. The film gained notoriety and cult popularity by being featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and it was the show's most popular episode. The film has a rare 0% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and Entertainment Weekly says the movie is widely regarded as, quite simply, the worst movie ever made. Even Warren himself would later admit his film was one of the worst ever, suggesting it might make a passable comedy if redubbed. In preparation for the film's 50th anniversary in 2016, it was later restored and released on Blu-ray in 2015. A Place for Lovers, or what's on screen right now, Amanti if you live in Italy, or Le Temps d'Amant if you live in France, is a French-Italian romantic film directed by Vittorio De Sica, starring Faye Dunaway as a terminally ill American fashion designer in Venice, Italy, and Marcello Mastroianni as a race car driver who has a whirlwind affair with her. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times called it the most god-awful piece of pseudo-romantic slop I've ever seen, and Charles Chaplin of the Los Angeles Times referred to it as the worst movie I've seen all year, and possibly since 1926. Leonard Maltin noted Ebert's comment in his review, and offered that the film was low points for all concerned. A Place for Lovers was included as one of the choices in the 50 worst films of all time, and Vanity Fair listed it as one of the 20 worst movies ever made. They Saved Hitler's Brain is a science fiction film directed by David Bradley. It was adapted for TV from a shorter 1963 theatrical feature film, Madmen of Mandoras, and was lengthened by about 20 minutes with additional footage shot by UCLA students at the request of the distributor. In the film, Adolf Hitler's head was severed from his body at the end of World War II, and the head plans to rule over a new Third Reich from South America. Just like Manos, it has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, this time based on 5 reviews from critics, with an average rating of 1.3 out of 10. Unless you count that as a 2.4 out of 10 on IMDb. TV Guide called it one of the all-time worst, while Danny Perry said it was a legitimate candidate for the worst film ever made title. In 1979, it won the world's worst film festival in Ottawa, Canada, which reportedly delighted Bradley. It has been featured in the Golden Turkey Awards and Cannes Film Festival, and has been spoofed on The Simpsons multiple times. This is our next decade. We're 27 minutes into the doco, and I've collected 9 movies I'll be covering. 1974 and 1976, you're missing out. The 1970 comedy film Myra Breckinridge, based on the book of the same name by Gore Vidal, directed by Michael San and starring Rachel Welch, Rex Reed, Mae West, John Huston and Farrah Fawcett, provoked controversy due to a scene in which Welch forcibly sodomizes a bound man while clips from various classic films play on screen. The film was initially rated X before edits and an appeal to the MPAA brought it down to an R. It also used the technique of inserting clips from Golden Age movies in such a way that the dialogue took on sexual undertones. The film was a critical failure, with Time magazine saying, "Myra Breckinridge is about as funny as a child molester." Leonard Maltin gave it a bomb and stated that it was as bad as any movie ever made. The Miami News critic Herb Kelly nominated Myra Breckinridge as the worst film ever made. It was also included in the book of lists worst movies of all time, which claimed that there was something in it to offend absolutely everyone. Likewise, the 50 worst films of all time and Vanity Fair also listed it as one of the worst movies ever made. Gore Vidal disowned it, calling it an awful joke, and blamed the movie for a decade-long drought in the sale of the original book. Directed by Don Barden, Zat was also known under various titles, including Hydra, Attack of the Swamp Creatures, Legend of the Zat Monster, and The Blood Waters of Dr. Zed. The film follows a Nazi-mad scientist who injects himself with a formula that turns him into a mutated catfish. Florida Times Union critic Matt Sorgel quipped that Zat could very well be the best film ever made about a mutated catfish. Critic Jeffrey Kaufman said, "This is the sort of film Ed Wood Jr. might have made on a bad day," and added, "Lovers of fantastically bad films rate Zat one of the worst." Patrick Norgel of DVD Verdict stated, "The acting in Zat is below subpar. Actors seem to be whispering their lines and trying hard not to fully comprehend that they're in one of the worst films ever made," while Michael Rubino of DVD Verdict also claimed Zat may be one of the worst films ever created. NPR called it a sci-fi fiasco when it became the loser on IMDb's Bottom 100. Zat appeared on Mystery Science Theater 3000, which gave it significant exposure, and was also featured on Red Letter Media's show Half of the Bag, where the hosts called it one of their favorite so bad it's good films. Total Film included it in their list of the 66 worst films of all time. The 1972 Israeli film An American Hippie in Israel is about an American hippie traveling to Israel after being involved with the Vietnam War, befriending Israeli flower children and encountering menacing moms along the way. The film was presumed lost, but after resurfacing 38 years after its production, it became a midnight sensation in Tel Aviv and developed a cult following akin to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was then released internationally on home video by Grindhouse Releasing. Gil Scheffler of the Jewish Daily Forward described it as perfectly awful, offering that it probably is the worst Israeli movie ever made, and a serious candidate for the worst movie of all time. Its description as a serious candidate for the worst movie of all time was echoed by Josh Olson in IndieWire. Ben Hardman of the Jerusalem Post stated that the film was surely one of the worst films ever made in Israel or beyond. 9 out of 10 said it claims the title of Worst Israeli Film and Most Amusing. A loose spoof of the 1966 Batman television series, cited as one of the earliest examples of a pornographic parody film, the presumably 1970s pornographic film Bad Pussy has been described as the worst pornographic film ever made due to some incredibly unarousing sex and a general attitude of awfulness. Possessing no credits or copyright information, there is no known record of Bad Pussy's existence prior to the mid-1990s, when it was discovered in the storeroom of an adult movie theater in Memphis, Tennessee, and subsequently released on home video by exploitation film distributor Something Weird Video. Corker Media's IO9 proclaimed the film to be the absolute nadir of pornography. Period. Not just Batman-themed pornography, all pornography, deriding its obese redneck cast as rendering the film wank-proof. Pornparody.com, a website dedicated to the genre, acknowledged its status as the worst adult movie of all time, describing Bad Pussy as renowned for its technical ineptness and anti-eroticism due to its physically unappealing actors. AV Maniacs contested Bad Pussy's categorization as pornography on the grounds of the lead actor's visible erectile dysfunction and instead labeled the film anti-porn, asking, "How else do you categorize an adult film that completely and utterly fails to elicit even the minutest amount of arousal in its viewers?" The book The Many More Lives of Batman by William Uricchio and Will Brooker also labeled Bad Pussy the worst porn film ever made, criticizing its poor adaptation of the source material. At Long Last Love was renowned director Peter Bogdanovich's musical homage to great 1930s Hollywood musicals. It features songs by Cole Porter and stars Sybil Shepherd and Burt Reynolds. Film Threat wrote that it received the most withering reviews any film ever received, while The Guardian reported that it was savaged by critics at the time and viewed as one of the worst films ever. Richard Brody of The New Yorker compared it to the later critical failures of Heaven's Gate and Ishtar, writing, "Critics of the time Heaven's Gate at Long Last Love, leaving Bogdanovich ishtarred and feathered." Such reviews included Hollis Alpert, in which he said that this failure is so dismal that it goes beyond failure, and Esquire critic John Simons, who said that it may be the worst movie musical of this, already, decade. Meanwhile, Buffalo News film critic Jeff Simon wrote, about 45 minutes in, it became apparent to one and all that this was one of the worst and most embarrassing major talent turkeys of all time. Bogdanovich, who was also the screenwriter, sent press releases to newspapers across the country apologizing for the film. CNN later noted that it had attained a legacy as being the worst musical extravaganza in Hollywood history, and Jay Cox has said the film was regarded as the Great White Elephant catastrophe of its time. Lester J. Kieser wrote that it was justly included on most lists of the 10 worst films ever made, as it was included in Michael Sorter's The Worst Films of All Time, the Golden Turkey Awards, and Vanity Fair's Worst Film List. Bogdanovich lamented being influenced by studio previews to cut the film before its theatrical release. Unbeknownst to Bogdanovich, a studio editor who preferred the director's first cut constructed his own based on the test screening version that he once had access to. This version subsequently aired on cable TV and streamed on Netflix in place of the theatrical cut. When news of this reached Bogdanovich, he contacted Fox and made a few finishing touches, resulting in a better received director's cut that debuted on home video in 2013. Exorcist II: The Heretic is the sequel to William Friedkin's Oscar-winning 1973 film, this time directed by John Boorman. Friedkin opted not to return to direct the sequel, and the Daily Telegraph states that Boorman hated the original and intended The Heretic to be an antidote to wash away the evil of Friedkin's film. Set 4 years after the first film, Linda Blair reprised her role as Regan McNeil, who is revealed to have healing powers, and Richard Vernon stars as Father Philip Lamont, who believes that the demon Pazuzu targets those with healing abilities. Blair agreed to return for the sequel as long as she did not have to wear the possession makeup from the first film, leading to the use of an unconvincing body double, while Vernon reads his lines off cue cards. Despite his character dying in the original film, Max von Sydow returned for flashback sequences set in Africa, where Lamont flies to on the back of the Locust. The Daily Telegraph notes that some consider it the worst film ever made. British film critic Mark Kermode called the original film his favourite film of all time, but believes the sequel to be the worst film ever made, stating, "This is a film that trashes a work of art. It's like someone deciding to do a Mona Lisa 2, but with a moustache." The Golden Turkey Awards named it the second worst film ever made, after Plan 9 from Outer Space, and it also appeared in the official Razzie Movie Guide. The AV Club listed it as the worst sequel of all time, and critic Bill Chambers stated it was possibly the worst film ever made, and surely the worst sequel ever made. Friedkin believed the sequel diminished the value of the original film, and called it the worst piece of shit I've ever seen, and a fucking disgrace. Eventually, the film garnered so much hate that Borman disowned it. In an interview with Bob McCabe for the book The Exorcist, Out of the Shadows, he confessed, "The sin I committed was not giving the audience what it wanted in terms of horror." A third installment in the Exorcist franchise, The Exorcist III: Legion, was released in 1990 and would in later years gain a cult following, with Orvanat Segalov writing that
the first rule of
Exorcist 3
is you do not talk about
Exorcist 2.
The Swarm is a 1978 horror film about a killer bee invasion of Texas, directed and produced by Irwin Allen. Despite its all-star cast, it was a box office failure and was excoriated by reviewers. On its UK release, the Sunday Times described The Swarm as simply the worst film ever made. Leslie Hallowell described it as a very obvious disaster movie with risible dialogue. The Guardian article on The Swarm stated, "You could pass it all off as a sick joke, except it cost $12 million, 22 million bees, and several years of someone's life." Barry Took, reviewing it for Punch, stated, "The story is of a banality matched only by the woodenness of the acting." Time Out magazine called The Swarm a risibly inadequate disaster movie. The Swarm is included in several worst movie books, including the Medved Brothers' The Golden Turkey Awards and the official Razzie Movie Guide. It soon gained a cult status. Bad movie. Scott Tobias of the AV Club called it one of the era's most abhorrent pieces of exploitation trash, and Patrick Noble of DVD Verdict stated, "It's one of the most soulless, vile, and morally reprehensible things I've ever had to sit through." Roger Ebert gave the film no stars, referring to it as a vile bag of garbage without a shred of artistic distinction, adding, "Attending it was one of the most depressing experiences of my life," and considered it the worst movie ever made. Gene Siskel also considered it one of the worst films ever made. Film Racket featured it as their first entry into their worst. The 1979 erotic historical drama Caligula, directed by Tinto Brass about the infamous Roman Emperor Caligula, was in part financed by Penthouse founder Bob Guccione. The film, featuring a prestigious cast, is notorious for its explicit scenes of sex and violence, including 6 minutes of hardcore porn footage, filmed by Guccione and another editor without Brass's approval. Caligula earned some pre-release controversy after Gore Vidal, who had written the script, distanced himself from the film, and actress Maria Schneider, who objected to the nude scenes, walked off the set and was replaced with then-unknown Teresa Ann Savoy. Upon its release, Vidal stated that it was easily one of the worst films ever made. Caligula also received strongly hostile reviews from critics, who denounced its extreme scenes of sex and violence and lack of narrative coherence. Roger Ebert gave Caligula a 0-star rating, dubbing it sickening, utterly worthless, shameful trash, accusing it of being artistically vulgar in its depiction of sex and violence, and of having technically incomplete direction and structure. It was one of the few films Ebert ever walked out on after describing himself as feeling disgusted and unspeakably depressed. Ebert also placed it on his most hated list, and Michael Sauter selected it for the worst movies of all time. Australian newspaper The Age stated that Caligula was being billed by critics everywhere as one of the worst films ever made. The Hamilton Spectator later referred to Caligula as possibly the worst movie ever made. Joe Holman, in an article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch discussing historical films set in ancient Rome, argued, "Two of the worst movies made in the 20th century were ancient Rome pieces, Cleopatra and Caligula." Christopher Armstead, reviewing Caligula for the website Film Critics United, stated, "Dollar for dollar, this could very well be the worst movie ever made." In 2011, Sean Bell of Pop Matters wrote of its enduring legacy. In the same way, much of our attention-deficit civilization may go through life vaguely aware that Citizen Kane is a masterpiece without ever seeing it. We know that Caligula is awful, usually without ever finding out for ourselves. Although widely criticized, the film's over-the-top combination of ultra-aesthetics and exploitation film tropes has gained a cult status over time, and in 2024, Thomas Negavan released an extensive re-edit, Caligula, The Ultimate Cut, incorporating alternate takes and unused footage from the Penthouse archives to enhance narrative coherence while shortening the film's overall length. In a review in the New York Times, Elizabeth Vincentelli said that it is a rare re-edited version of the movie that features less graphic sex and violence than the original. In an interview with The Guardian, McDowell praised the removal of sexually explicit material added by Guccione, and said that The Ultimate Cut is very much the movie I thought I was making. The Ultimate Cut holds a 65% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 40 reviews, not counting the other cut that only has an 18%. However, Braz has publicly disowned it. We're moving on to this decade right now, and I'm going to be covering 15 movies that most critics consider the worst they could find. 1983 to 1985 will be skipped ahead because there were no worst ones made or released during that period. The Western epic Heaven's Gate,
For Heaven's Gate, Professor,
loosely based on the Johnson County War in 1890s Wyoming, was plagued by massive cost and time overruns, largely due to director Michael Cimino's extreme attention to detail. He demanded 50 takes of at least one scene and refused to start shooting for another until a cloud he liked rolled across the sky. It cost over $44 million, but brought in only $3.5 million at the box office. The original version ran at nearly 4 hours, but was pulled from release after only 1 week due to scathing reviews. It later resurfaced in an 149-minute version, but by then, the damage was done. The film effectively ended not only the existence of United Artists as an independent Hollywood studio, but also, largely, Cimino's career. Initially considered a director, on the rise after directing The Deer Hunter, his reputation never recovered after Heaven's Gate.
For Heaven's Gate, Professor.
The production is also notorious for the cruelty to animals that occurred both on-screen and on-site, including deliberately killing a horse with explosives. The controversies surrounding Heaven's Gate's failure are credited for having a role in ending the Archer period of the 1970s, with studios subsequently taking control back from directors. Vincent Canby called it an unqualified disaster, among other things. Roger Ebert called it the most scandalous cinematic waste I've ever seen. After one of his grandiose spending and defiant nature towards Studio United Artists got out, Cimino was awarded a 1990 Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Director, and the film was nominated for 4 more Razzies, including Worst Picture. In 1999, Time placed the film on a list of the 100 worst ideas of the 20th century, and Rolling Stone ranked it as one of the worst decisions in movie history. In 2008, Joe Queenan of The Guardian called it the worst film ever made, saying that it defies belief. Readers of the film magazine Empire later voted Heaven's Gate the 6th worst film of all time, and Vanity Fair included it in its list of the worst films ever made. Despite the vicious reviews, the film's reputation improved over time. In fall of 2012, the New York Film Festival, the venue for its infamous opening, premiered the restored director's cut. In stark contrast, the Times called the restored version a modern masterpiece, and its 1980 cut one of the greatest injustices of cinematic history. The film has also been released on Blu-ray and DVD by the Criterion Collection. Manuel Dargis of the New York Times said that the film has been called a disaster and a disgrace, yet also anointed a masterpiece. In 2023, French magazine Télérama ranked it 17th in its list of the 100 greatest films in the history of cinema, describing the work as a post-classical, lyrical, and disenchanted western. The Apple is a 1980 science fiction musical comedy film written and directed by Menahem Golan. It stars Catherine Mary Stewart as a young singer named Bibi, who, in a futuristic 1994, signs to an evil label named Boogaloo International Music. It deals with themes of conformity versus rebellion, and makes use of biblical allegory, including that of Adam and Eve and the Rapture. Common criticism from both reviews that appeared in trade publications and major news outlets and the audience were a lack of originality, a weak script, uninspired music, poor execution, and Golan's inexperienced take on the 1960s hippie movement. During the 1980 Montreal World Film Festival, some members of the audience threw vinyl records of music from the film at the screen. At the 1980 Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, the film received 7 nominations and won 2 awards, Worst Director and Least Special Effects. Stinkers co-founder Mike Lancaster later selected Apple as the worst film he had ever seen. The Saturday Evening Post listed it as the worst movie musical ever, and critic Tim Braden described it as a completely unadulterated bundle of the worst of cinema, all spun up into one ball of madness. It cannot be described, and it could barely be experienced. Sean Burns in the Philadelphia Weekly wrote, "The Apple isn't just the worst disco musical ever made, it could very well be the worst movie ever made, period." The Apple was included in Paste's Bad Movie Diaries column, where critic Kenneth Lowe described it as, without a doubt, the most cringe-inducing, the most mortifying, the absolutely most embarrassing feature we've ever watched. It has also been covered by the How Did This Get Made podcast and Flavorwire's Bad Movie Night column, and Metal Floss listed it as one of the 10 really bad movies that define bad movies. The war film Inchon, directed by Terence Young and starring Laurence Olivier as General Douglas MacArthur, was meant to depict the Battle of Inchon during the Korean War. Producer Mitsuharu Ishii was a senior member of the Japanese branch of the Unification Church, whose leader, Sun Myung Moon, claimed he had the film made to show MacArthur's spirituality and connection to God and the Japanese people. Its eventual production cost of $46 million resulted in a $5 million box office gross, and the New York Times review written by Vincent Campi calls the movie the most expensive B-movie ever. The Washington Post described Inchon as one of the biggest commercial disasters in film history. Every conceivable kind of problem plagued production, including labor issues, the US military withdrawing support due to the film's Unification Church connection, weather and natural disasters, customs difficulties, expensive directorial blunders, and the original director quitting before the start of production. Olivier's performance was criticized, and he was awarded the 1982 Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actor. The film itself took the 1982 Razzies for Worst Picture and Worst Screenplay, and Young's direction earned him a tie for Worst Director of 1982. A number of reviewers at various media outlets described Inchon as the worst film ever made, including the Washington Post, Newsweek, TV Guide, and the Canadian Press. Inchon was later profiled in multiple books on worst in film, including The Hollywood Hall of Shame by Harry and Michael Medford, and The Worst Movies of All Time by Michael Sauter. To date, Inchon has never been released on home video in the United States, although it was aired on the church's Good Life TV network, as you can see right here. See? I did not download this movie illegally. But if it ever did get a home video release, it would be pretty awesome, right? The adventure film Tarzan the Ape Man, loosely based on the novel Tarzan and the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs, stars Miles O'Keefe in the title role and Bo Derek as his partner Jane Parker, and is told from Jane's point of view. Despite being a box office success, critics poorly received it upon its release due to its poor screenplay, bad acting, and unintentional humor. Leonard Maltin, writing for his movie guide, stated that the film lacks action, humor, and charm, and considered it so bad that it nearly forced editors of this book to devise a rating lower than BOMB! Leslie Hallowell was equally harsh. He described Tarzan the Ape Man as certainly the worst of the Tarzan movies, and possibly the banalist film so far made. Even the animals give poor performances. Writer Thomas H. Hischak described it thus: produced and directed without a shred of talent by John Derek, Tarzan the Ape Man often ranks high in lists of the worst movies ever made. Film critic John Nesbitt considered it my pick for worst film ever, while Matt Brunton of Creative Loafing wrote, "This cinematic atrocity truly is one of the all-time worsts." Tarzan the Ape Man was nominated for 6 awards at the second Golden Raspberry Awards, winning 1 for Worst Actress. It holds a 9% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 22 reviews. Mummy Dearest, directed by Frank Perry, was based on the memoir of the same name by Christina Crawford about her upbringing by John Crawford. It was the first film to sweep the Golden Raspberry Awards nominations, winning a total of 5 Razzies out of the 9 nominations, including Worst Picture and Worst Actress. The same organisation also named it Worst Picture of the Decade in 1989-90 and was nominated for Worst Drama of our first 25 years in 2004-5. The film is part of the 100 Most Awful in the official Razzie Movie Guide and Michael Saunders' The Worst Movies of All Time. It earned, as film critic and TV host Richard Krause put it, some of the nastiest reviews ever. Eric Henderson of CBS Minneapolis named it at the top of his best worst movies ever list. Roger Ebert wrote of this film, "I can't imagine who would want to subject themselves to this movie. Mummy Dearest is a painful experience that drones on endlessly, as Joan Crawford's relationship with her daughter, Christina, disintegrates from cruelty through jealousy into pathos." On the performance of Faye Dunaway, Variety said, "Dunaway does not choose scenery. Dunaway starts neatly at each corner of the set in every scene, and swallows it whole, co-stars and all." Vanity Fair and Rotten Tomatoes subsequently included Mummy Dearest on their worst film lists. Despite the reviews at the time, the film was a box office success, grossing $39 million worldwide on a $5 million budget. It has a 50% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 50 reviews. And the site's consensus reads, "Mummy Dearest certainly doesn't lack for conviction, and neither does Faye Dunaway's legendary performance as a wire-wielding monster. Unfortunately, the movie is too campy and undisciplined to transcend guilty pleasure." The Turkish science fiction adventure Dünyayı Kurtaran Adam, aka The Man Who Saves the World, aka Turkish Star Wars, was directed by Serdin İnanç and starred Cüneyt Arkın. It is notorious for illegally using footage from well-known science fiction films and shows, most notably Star Wars, along with stealing the music score from films such as Moonraker and Raiders of the Lost Ark. The film is also criticized for its nonsensical plot, badly written dialogue, and crude special effects. It is also a fantasy martial arts film, heavily influenced by 1970s Hong Kong martial arts films from Golden Harvest. Josh Kerbs of Article Space called it the worst movie ever, and stated, "There are many bad sci-fi movies, and for many years, movie editors even considered Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space the worst movie of all times. Plan 9 is still a pretty good movie when compared to Turkish Star Wars." Sabah called it the world's worst film. Harriet described the film as sitting on the throne of the king when compared to other so bad it's good cult films. Toronto Standard called it a dollar store Star Wars and compared it to the works of Ed Wood. When it became apparent that the film had inspired an enthusiastic international cult, a sequel, The Son of the Man Who Saved the World, The Son of the Man Who Saved the World, was shot in 2006 and featured many returning members of the original cast and crew. The film was included on Time Out's 40 Best Bad Movies Ever Made list. Directed by Willard Huyck, written by Huyck and Gloria Katz, and produced by George Lucas, it is based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. Howard the Duck received overwhelmingly negative reviews from film critics. Orange Coast magazine writer Mark Weinberg and Leonard Maltin criticized the decision to shoot the film in live action. The appearance of Howard was criticized as being unconvincing due to his poorly functioning mouth and expressionless face. Reviewers also criticized the acting and humor and found the film boring. Dave Kerr of the Chicago Tribune said the movie's crude, often embarrassing, sex jokes seemed out of place with the more innocent aspects of the film. Jay Carr of the Boston Globe claimed that they don't get much worse than Howard. Glenn Heath Jr. of Slant Magazine wrote that it has a rightful place in the canon of the worst films ever, and TV Guide states that it is one of the worst big-budget movies ever made. It was featured in Empire's poll of the 50 worst films ever made, and Screen Rant and Vanity Fair have included it on their worst film lists. Rotten Tomatoes gives the film a score of 13% based on 86 reviews, making it the lowest rated Lucasfilm production of those reviewed on the site. The site's consensus states, while it has its moments, Howard the Duck suffers from an uneven tone and mediocre performances. It received 7 Golden Raspberry Award nominations in 1987, including Worst Supporting Actor, Worst Director, and Worst Original Song. It won 4 trophies for Worst Screenplay, Worst New Star, Worst Visual Effects, and Worst Picture, tied with Under the Cherry Moon. The movie also won the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards for Worst Picture. The negative reaction to the film took its toll on the cast, who found themselves unable to work on other projects as a result. Over time, the film has remained a source of fascination and developed a small but loyal fanbase. Howard the Duck has appeared in several Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and series beginning in 2014's Guardians into the Galaxy, in which he was voiced by Seth Green. Ishtar was written and directed by Elaine May and starred Oscar-winning duo Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman as a nod to the Road 2 film series featuring Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. Beatty and Hoffman star as Rogers and Clark, 2 untalented lounge singers who travel to Morocco in hopes of finding a gig. Due to unanticipated problems with filming in a desert, which resulted in numerous reshoots, the film ran over budget by $30 million. While its final budget cost was $55 million, Ishtar earned only $14 million at the North American box office, leading Ishtar to become synonymous with the box office flop. It was also subject to harsh reviews from critics. The film was nominated for Worst Picture and Worst Screenplay in the 8th Golden Raspberry Awards, winning 1 for Worst Director. The San Jose Mercury News claimed that Time has not improved this film's reputation as being one of the worst ever made. Time Out suggested it was so bad it could have been deliberate and called it one of the worst films ever made, while Anne Morrissey referred to it as the Citizen Kane of big-budget, A-list, vehicular homicides. It was included in Michael Sorter's The Worst Movies of All Time book. Rotten Tomatoes placed it amongst 25 movies so bad they're unmissable, and Richard Roeper included it on his list of the 40 worst films he had seen. In 1999, Time placed the film on a list of the 100 worst ideas of the 20th century. The film has since become a cult classic. Ishtar has seen a minor critical re-evaluation from some critics like Richard Brody, and directors Quentin Tarantino, Edgar Wright, and Martin Scorsese have praised it in interviews. Gary Larson, who initially lampooned the movie in The Far Side, said he regrets writing that cartoon because they based it solely on Ishtar's reputation, and that he enjoyed the film when he later watched it. As of December 2022, it is the only cartoon he has publicly admitted to regretting. Defenders argue that the studio did not back May, resulting in a public relations disaster before it was released in cinemas. Joe Queenan compared the film to another comedy film considered the worst, Jiggly, and wrote that although it was considered one of the worst films ever made at the time of its release, it has several comic moments and does not get worse on subsequent viewings, unlike Jiggly. Leonard Part 6, starring Bill Cosby, who's also the writer and producer of this, was intended as a parody of spy movies. Leonard Parker, a former CIA spy, is bored out of retirement to save the world from an evil vegetarian who brainwashes animals to kill people. Rita Kempley at the Washington Post noted the large number of Coca-Cola product placements and said, "The only good thing about Bill Cosby's Leonard Part 6 is that we didn't have to see parts 1 through 5. Scott Weinberg at DVD Talk noted the film as truly one of the worst movies you'll ever see. Movies this bad should be handled with Teflon gloves and a pair of tongs. By 1990, Dennis King of the Tulsa World wrote that the film had become synonymous with bomb. Total Film and Vanity Fair subsequently included Leonard Part 6 on their respective worst film lists. Cosby himself disowned the film, and when it was released to cinemas, he publicly advised people not to see it. It earned Golden Raspberries for Worst Actor, Worst Picture, and Worst Screenplay. It was also nominated for 2 more Razzie Awards, for Worst Supporting Actress and Worst Director. Cosby became the first person to accept a Golden Raspberry Award, and said, "It was the worst movie I ever made. The worst movie anyone ever made." Nuki is a 1987 South African film directed by Sias Odendaal and Michael Paklepa, and starring Steve Elsbach, Ronald Franz, and Glynis Johns. The plot concerns an alien, Nuki, who crash lands on Earth and seeks help from 2 children to reunite with his brother, Miko, who has been captured by the United States government. The film is considered to be a knockoff of Steven Spielberg's 1982 film, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Whitney Seibold of Slash Film writes that Nuki is only remarkable for how undeniably terrible it is, noting that it appears on lists of the worst films ever made. Comic book resources note that it is regarded as one of the worst movies ever made, with critic Brad Jones selecting Nuki as the worst film he has ever seen, and Red Letter Media calling it possibly one of the worst films ever made. Total Film write that it is considered by some to be the most painful movie ever made. There was the Nuki, the worst kids movie ever made, and one of the worst science fiction films ever made. The film's co-director, Michael Paklepa, referred to Nuki as the most wrong-on thing he had ever done in his life, and feared that the final product was the worst film on Earth. The Garbage Pail Kids movie is a 1997 live-action adaptation of the then-popular trading card series of the same name, itself a gross-out parody of the then-popular Cabbage Patch Kids dolls, co-created by Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Art Spiegelman. The film is often criticized for its gross-out humor, nonsensical plot, poor explanations, bad acting, and the unsettling appearance of the Garbage Pail Kids. It has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. On Metacritic, the film holds a score of 1, making it tied for the lowest scoring film on the site. Karen James of the New York Times said the movie is too repulsive for children or adults of any age, and is enough to make you believe in strict and faraway boarding schools. Carlos Cotto of the Sun Sentinel called it one of the worst ever made. Internet critic Doug Walker, best known for the series Nostalgia Critic, stated in a 2012 video that it was not only the worst film he had ever reviewed as a nostalgia critic, but the worst movie he had ever seen overall, deeming that the film served to undermine its own moral. His mother had forbidden him from seeing it as a child, citing,
"I, by all the heavenly blessings, thank my mother for stopping me from seeing this movie. Because I'm very convinced that this movie would have taken away half my brain."
In 2025, Walker released an updated list of the worst films he had reviewed, with the Garbage Pail Kids movie once again taking the top spot. Much of the film's content is said to be inappropriate for children, its intended audience. Throughout the movie, the Garbage Pail Kids steal, get in fights, bite people's toes off, fluctuate in people's faces, threaten others with switchblades, urinate upon themselves, and run over cars. In addition to scatological behavior, the movie has several scenes that feature sexual images, violence, and drinking. Offended parents launched a nationwide protest of the movie that successfully resulted in the movie being withdrawn from circulation. The shortened release contributed to the movie's poor gross of only $1 million. It was nominated for 3 Razzies at the 8th Golden Raspberry Awards: Worst Visual Effects, Worst New Star for the Garbage Pail Kids collectively, and Worst Original Song. Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 is the sequel to the 1994 Christmas-themed slasher film Silent Night, Deadly Night, which faced protests from parent groups and sharp criticism from At the Movies hosts Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel due to its promotional campaign featuring an axe-wielding Santa Claus. The film was a financial success despite the controversy, leading producers to enlist Lee Harry to repurpose its footage for a new project. However, $100,000 was eventually allocated to shoot additional original material. Nearly half of the Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2's runtime consists of flashbacks to the first film, narrated by Ricky Caldwell, the brother of the original film's protagonist, as he recounts events before embarking on his own murderous rampage. Much of the film's reception and legacy centers on Freeman's performance, which Flavorwire states may very well be the single worst performance ever committed to celluloid. A scene in which Ricky shouts, "Garbage day!" before shooting and killing a bystander taking out his trash became an internet meme after being uploaded onto YouTube in its early years. Screen Rant has since deemed the film to be a masterpiece of the so bad it's good variety and one of the worst movies ever made. Emmett O'Regan of Comic Book Resources also selected it as the worst movie ever made, and an article in Paste asserted that, in terms of filmmaking quality, it's hard to believe that in terms of pure, unadulterated crap, anything could ever surpass it. Additionally, Flavorwire, Slashfilm, and Paste have all listed it as the worst Christmas film ever made. Time Out and Flavorwire later included it on their respective lists of the worst films ever made. Hobgoblins, by Rick Sloane, is widely considered a low-budget knockoff that capitalizes on the popularity of the 1984 film Gremlins. It gained popularity in 1998 after being featured on an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. MST3K writer Paul Chaplin later commented on Hobgoblins, saying, "Oh man, you have no idea the torture it was to watch this movie several times in the space of a week. It shoots right up to the top of the list of the worst movies we've ever done." Specific points of the film that were lampooned were the extreme misogyny and atrocious treatment of women, the film's technical incompetence and repetitive scenes, its asinine, poorly conceived plot, its dreadful acting, and its ugly look and gratuitous vulgarity, particularly in regards to its characters and subject matter. David Cornelius of DVD Talk stated, "There's not one aspect of this movie that isn't the worst thing ever." The Standards Bad Horror Club noted its status as one of the worst films of all time, commenting, "It's so preposterously badly made, terribly acted, and ineptly constructed that it makes for some of the most fun you can ever have watching a movie." Sloan has embraced Hobgoblin's status as one of the worst films of all time, stating that he fears that it will be forgotten if it is removed from IMDb's user-generated bottom 100 list. After seeing the MST3K episode himself, Sloan was inspired to direct a sequel, which was released in 2009. In addition to IMDb, it has been featured on lists from Flavorwire and Total Film. Mac and Me is about a young boy in a wheelchair who meets and befriends an alien who has crash-landed on Earth. A box office failure, the film grossed $6 million in the United States on a $13 million budget. It used to have a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, whose critical consensus notes that it is totally infamous as both an imitation of E.T., the extraterrestrial, and a marketing vehicle for McDonald's and Coca-Cola. Leonard Maltin described the film as being more like a TV commercial than a movie, and Marjorie Baumgarten of the Austin Chronicle called it a shameless E.T. knockoff. Mac and Me is widely regarded as one of the worst films ever made, with The Telegraph reporting that it is frequently pulled out in worst film of all time arguments. Filmmaker Morgan Spurlock declared it the worst thing you'll ever see in your entire life, as well as the most egregious example of product placement in cinema history. The film was also named the worst ever in the San Francisco Chronicle, as well as by broadcaster Simon Mayo and writer and producer Damon Lindelof. Michael Hayden of GQ India referred to it as hands down the worst family movie in Hollywood history. The film was nominated for 4 Razzie Awards, including Worst Picture and Worst Screenplay, and won 2 trophies: Worst Director for Stuart Ruffield and Worst New Star for Ronald McDonald in a cameo. Mac and Me has however gained a cult following and was featured on the 2nd season of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 revival. Things, a 1999 Canadian low-budget independent shot-on-video horror exploitation film, was written and produced by Andrew Jordan and Barry J. Gillis. It cost approximately $35,000 in total to make, and marked the mainstream film debut of porn star Amber Lynn. It was ostensibly made as homage to horror icons in films such as George A. Romero and his Night of the Living Dead franchise. Adam Simchuk of Screen Rant writes, "While films like The Room and Birdemic seem to be constant contenders for the best so bad it's good movie, Things is the true unheralded champion among many cinephiles." Likewise, Jeff Kirshner of Dead Central Dread Central nominated it as the worst movie ever made, and Will Fiver opined that "it's so terrible I can't think of another movie that comes even close." In 2022, RiffTrax concluded that Things was the worst movie they had ever spoofed. Before we open the gate to the new millennium, this is going to be the final decade in the 20th century. So, there's 14 so bad it's good movies to be covered here. 1992, you're missing out. Despite its title, Troll 2 does not feature any trolls and has no relation to the original 1986 film. Troll 2 was produced under the title Goblins, but the title was changed by American distributors. In the film, an American family vacations to the town of Nilbog, where vegetarian goblins attempt to turn the family into edible plants. It was shot in Utah, and the cast was composed of local amateur actors. A language barrier developed between the cast and the Italian crew, led by director Claudio Fragasso, who had translated the script to English. The bad acting and dialogue have become notorious for their camp value, with individual scenes having become internet memes. In 2009, Michael Stephenson, the child star of Troll 2, released Best Worst Movie, a documentary exploring the film's tumultuous production and its unexpected cult following. NPR reports that it is known as the worst movie of all time, while the AV Club calls it a popular candidate for the worst film ever made. Likewise, TV Guide proclaimed that Troll 2 is really as bad as they come, and Ken Haig of Mountain Express stated in his review that there are movies that are bad. There are movies that are so bad they're good. And then there's Troll 2, a movie that's so bad that it defies comprehension. Troll 2 regularly appears on lists of films considered the worst, including FlavorWire, Photogrammers, IGN, Rotten Tomatoes, Screen Rant, and Time Out. Furthermore, Collider named it the most rewatchable bad movie of all time. The French-British film Highlander 2, The Quickening, is a sequel to the 1996 cult film Highlander, which transitions the fantasy of the original film into science fiction and reckons the mystical warriors of the first film into aliens. It received a harsh reception from both critics and audiences, as it has a 0% score on Rotten Tomatoes and appears on its 100 worst movies of all time. Common criticisms included the lack of motivation for the characters, blatant disregard for the backstory from the first film, glaring plot holes, a messy and nonsensical story structure, the filmmaker's inability to balance unrelated plots and subplots, and obvious contradictions in the film's internal logic. In selecting it as the worst movie sequel of all time, Comic Book Resources also wrote that it is typically considered one of the worst films of all time. Roger Ebert named it the worst film of 1991, stating, "If there's a planet somewhere whose civilization is based on the worst movies of all time, Highlander 2, The Quickening deserves a sacred place among their most treasured artifacts." An IGN review said, "How bad is this movie? Well, imagine if Ed Wood were alive today and someone gave him a multi-million-dollar budget. See his imagination running rampant, bringing in aliens from outer space with immensely powerful firearms, immortals who bring each other back to life by calling out their names, epic duels on flying skateboards, and a blatant disregard for anything logical or previously established. Now you are starting to get closer to the vision of Highlander 2. Screen Rant has since included it on its list of the 25 worst films of all time. In 1995, the film's director, Russell Mulcahy, made a director's cut version, known as Highlander 2, Renegade version, and then later released another version, simply known as Highlander 2, the special edition for its 2004 DVD release. The film was reconstructed on both occasions, largely from existing material, with certain scenes removed and others added back in, and the entire sequence of events changed. The reconstructed film's reception was far better than the originals. It was elevated to a mixed reception. The first feature-length live-action film based on a video game, Super Mario Bros. Was directed by the husband and wife team of Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel. It follows the brothers Mario and Luigi, plumbers who venture into a parallel universe to rescue Princess Daisy from the villainous King Koopa. The Super Mario series publisher, Nintendo, believed the Mario franchise was strong enough for experimentation and gave the filmmakers free creative license. The finished film bears little resemblance to the games, trading a colourful mushroom kingdom for a dystopic world populated by humanoid dinosaurs. Sci-Fi Wire wrote, "Some movies are so bad that they're secretly good. Super Mario Bros. Is so bad, it crushes your spirit. It's unfathomably terrible." The film was criticised for its inconsistent tone, complex narrative, and a lack of faithfulness to the source material. According to Variety, Super Mario Bros. Is a mainstay on lists compiling the worst films of all time. It was voted the 6th worst film of all time by RiffTrax in 2012, and IGN ranked it among the best worst movies ever made in 2021. Author David Boreanaz, in his 2020 book, The Art of Fairness, called Super Mario Bros. The worst movie ever made. In addition to scathing reviews, Super Mario Bros. Was a box office bomb, and Morton and Jankel were blacklisted as directors in Hollywood. In a 2007 interview, Bob Hoskins said, "The worst thing I ever did? Super Mario Bros. It was a fucking nightmare. The whole experience was a nightmare. It had a husband and wife team directing, whose arrogance had been mistaken for talent. After so many weeks, their own agent told them to get off the set. Fucking nightmare, fucking idiots." In a 2011 interview, he was asked, "What is the worst job you've done? What has been your biggest disappointment? And if you could edit your past, what will you change?" His answer to all three was Super Mario Bros. The film made Nintendo wary of licensing its works to film studios, and it did not license Mario again until it collaborated with Illumination for the Super Mario Bros. Movie 3 decades later. Seth Rogen, who voiced Donkey Kong in the 2023 film, called Super Mario Bros. One of the worst films ever made, and what made me realise that movies, could be bad. That never occurred to me until that moment. The Rob Reiner film North is an adaptation of the novel North, the tale of a 9-year-old boy who becomes a free agent and travels around the world in search of the perfect parents. What a long name, by Alban Zweibel, who also wrote the screenplay and has a minor role in the film. North, which stars Elijah Wood in the title role, and also marks Scarlett Johansson's film debut, was a critical and commercial failure, earning only $7 million worldwide despite its budget over $40 million. It was widely criticized for its plot, its all-star cast of insensitive characters, lack of humor, and portrayal of numerous ethnic stereotypes. It has a 14% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars and wrote,
"I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it.
Hated the sensibility that thought anyone would like it. Hated the implied insult to the audience by its belief that anyone would be entertained by it." He continued saying North is a bad film, one of the worst movies ever made, and it is also on his list of most hated films. Both Ebert and Gene Siskel named North as the worst film of 1994. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle said in his review that North is director Rob Reiner's first flat-out failure, a sincerely raw, energetically made picture that all the same crashes on takeoff. It's strange and oddly distasteful, and it's best managing to be bad in some original and unexpected ways. Richard Roeper named North as one of the 40 worst movies he has ever seen, saying that, of all the films on this list, North may be the most difficult to watch from start to finish. The film was nominated for the following awards at the 15th Golden Raspberry Awards: Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Worst Supporting Actress, Worst Supporting Actor, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. The Norwegian romantic film Dis and his story om Keja, a story about love, was directed by Orn Sand. The film follows different couples and their love stories around the world, in Cairo, Normandy, Oslo, and New York City. A Story About Love received universally poor reviews by critics, and has been called the most poorly reviewed Norwegian film in history. Critic Harold Kostad of Dagsavisen gave it a score of 0, refused to acknowledge A Story About Love as a film, and claimed to have never seen anything worse. Aftenposten referred to the film as the largest turkey and the most revealed film, and Total Film included it on its list of the 66 worst films ever made. Despite being a critical disaster, it became a commercial success, getting cult film status with a following akin to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, with fans embracing it so bad its good qualities. Director on set insists that A Story About Love is a masterpiece. Hype for Paul Verhoeven's erotic drama Showgirls focused on the sex and nudity in his NC-17 French-American film with a $45 million budget, but the final result was critically derided. Much hype revolved around the film's star, Elizabeth Berkley, who only 2 years before had starred in the light-hearted and chaste teen sitcom Saved by the Bell. The film won 7 Razzie Awards, a record at the time, and received 13 nominations, a record that still stands. It received an additional award at the 20th Golden Raspberry Awards, where it was awarded Worst Picture of the Decade. Kenneth Tarrant of the Los Angeles Times called it a film of thunderous oafishness that gives adult subject matter the kind of bad name it does not need or deserve. Michael Dacina of TheMovieReport.com also criticized the film, claiming that it was the best bad filmmaking Hollywood has to offer. Adam White wrote in The Independent that it was the worst movie ever made, but also a masterpiece. Stephen Lynch of the Knight Rider or Tribune similarly named it the worst movie ever made, calling it so bad it may be brilliant. Various sources have since included Showgirls in their respective lists of the worst films ever made, including Rotten Tomatoes, Empire, Screen Rant, Vanity Fair, and Flavor Wire. Showgirls was also featured in Michael Sorter's The Worst Movies of All Time, as well as the official Razzie Movie Guide. Despite being a critical failure and failing at the box office initially, Showgirls found success as a camp cult film, particularly among the LGBT community, but whether the film was intended to be satirical remains subject to debate. On the home video market, the film was MGM's most profitable release for years. A freely adapted version of the 1850 romantic novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, directed by Roland Joff and starring Demi Moore and Gary Oldman. The film met with universally negative reviews and was a box office bomb, grossing $10.4 million against a production budget of $46 million. Multiple critics named the film the worst of 1995. Chris Hicks of the Deseret News argued that its deviation from the source material represents Hollywood's arrogance in its purest form. The Washington Post's Amy E. Schwartz reported that the nutty film was described by numerous reviewers as the worst they had ever seen. Kevin Williamson of National Review observed a combination of awfulness and inexplicability and claimed that any objective and authoritative analysis will reveal that the worst film ever made is Demi Moore's version of The Scarlet Letter. Sadie Trombetta of Bustle wrote that it has earned an almost permanent spot on every worst movie of all time list, while author Libby Fisher-Hellman noted that it is widely cited as the worst film adaptation ever made. The film was nominated for 7 Golden Raspberry Awards, winning Worst Remake or Sequel. Furthermore, Roger Ebert placed the film on his most hated list. The 1996 comedy film Biodome focuses on 2 moronic stoner best friends, played by Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin, who accidentally get trapped inside of the biodome, a hermetically sealed ecological system whose owner is played by Henry Gibson, after mistaking it for a mall while looking for a bathroom. For MTV News, Eric Snyder wrote in 2008 that nothing can account for the movie Biodome, which is, and I do not make this assertion lightly, the worst crime ever perpetrated against humanity throughout all of recorded history. Snyder went on to call it quite bad, and certainly one of the worst comedies he had ever seen, criticizing Pauly Shore's performance as unfunny and the film's writing as stupid. Sci-Fi Wire's Cassidy Ward described Biodome as one of the best worst movies of all time, stating that its plot strains credulity, while John O'Brien of Inverse called it one of the worst movies ever made, and wrote that it has nothing to offer but unconvincing pratfalls, tumbleweed one-liners, and some unashamed sexism too. It was described as almost unwatchably awful and a baffling piece of work by Charles Bradisco of Uproxx, who wrote that it was a perennial contender in the battle for the title of worst movie ever. The AV Club's Nathan Rabin wrote, critics and audiences alike found the Biodome to be an abomination to the Lord, an affront to the gods of cinema, and also a very bad movie. Bad enough to be considered the gold standard of crapitude in Shaw's over. Noting that it had the lowest Metacritic score of any movie, with 1 out of 100. Biodome was named one of the worst movies of the 1990s in a poll conducted by RiffTrax. Kylie Minogue, who starred in the film as oceanographer Petra von Kant, called appearing in the film the worst decision of her career. For his performance in the movie, Shaw won the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actor at the 17th Golden Raspberry Awards, tying with Tom Arnold for his performance in Big Bully. Batman and Robin is a superhero film based on the DC character Batman and is the fourth and final installment of the Burton-Schumacher Batman film series. It is directed by Joel Schumacher and stars George Clooney as Bruce Wayne, Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy, Chris O'Donnell as Dick Grayson, Alicia Silverstone as Barbara Wilson, and Michael Gough as Alfred Pennyworth. The film was largely criticized for its toyetic and camp approach, and Mr. Freeze's approach and one-line jokes. As of June 2017, review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reports that 11% of critics have given the film a positive review based on 89 reviews, certifying it rotten with an average rating of 3.7 out of 10, or according to IMDb, a 3.8 out of 10. And in critics' consensus, Joel Schumacher's tongue-in-cheek attitude hits an unbearable limit in Batman and Robin, resulting in a frantic and mindless movie that's too jokey to care much for. By comparison, Metacritic collected an average score of 28 out of 100 based on 21 reviews. Michael J. Nelson of Mystery Science Theater 3000 fame wrote of this movie in his book, Movie Mega Cheese, Batman and Robin is not the worst movie ever. No, indeed, it's the worst thing ever. Yes, it's the single worst thing that we as human beings have ever produced in recorded history. Batman and Robin also came in first in the Empire poll of the 50 worst films ever. Joel Schumacher apologized to disappointed fans on the 2005 DVD release of Batman and Robin, and in 2021, Clooney stated that he refused to let his wife watch the film, saying, "There are certain films I just go, I want my wife to have some respect for me." Clooney, however, would reprise his role as Bruce Wayne from the film in 2023's The Flash. The French romance film Le Jour et la Nuit, The Day and the Night, pardon my French, was directed by philosopher Bernard Henry Levy. It follows a French author who fled to Mexico for a quiet life, and an actress who was willing to seduce him to get a part in the film adapted from one of his books. Before its release, The Day and the Night was heavily promoted in many French newspapers and magazines. When the film premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival in 1997, hundreds of journalists walked out of the screening, and those that stayed ridiculed it. Following its release, The Day and the Night was harshly criticized by the French media, with overwhelmingly negative reviews appearing in publications such as Libération, Le Monde, and Le Nouvel Observateur. The film also did poorly commercially, with only 73,000 seats for The Day and the Night, having been sold 2 months after its release. La Humanite called it an absolute debacle, and Michael Houellebecq referred to it as the most preposterous film in history. The Day and the Night was considered the worst French film since 1945 by film magazine Cahiers du Cinéma, and its status as the worst film in history was discussed by the French version of Slate. Likewise, English-language film site /Film described its status as one of the worst foreign-language movies ever made, and filmmaker Claude Chabrol selected it as one of the worst movies ever made. An original documentary, Anatomy of a Massacre, was released with the DVD and focused on its intense negative reception and failure. An adaptation of the popular 1960s British TV series of the same name, The Avengers, no, not the 2012 Marvel movie, starred Ralph Fiennes as John Steed and Uma Thurman as Emma Peel, with Sean Connery as the antagonist, Sir Augustin Winter. It was directed by Jeremiah S. Chekiek, or what, I can't pronounce that. The Avengers began to receive negative publicity after Warner Brothers, the film's distributor, refused to allow any early press screenings for movie reviewers. After early test screenings, The Avengers was heavily edited by the studio. On its release, The Avengers was savaged by film critics, with the Birmingham Post stating, "The Avengers is being slated by critics as the worst film ever made," and adding that one reviewer had joked the film was such a turkey that the makers should have handed distribution to the poultry chain Burton Matthews. Several reviewers disparaged the Avengers for lacking the wit and excitement of its source material. Janet Maslin strongly criticized The Avengers, with pseudo-suave repartee that would make Austin Powers blush, and with so many shades have Howard the Duck that one scene depicts man-sized pastel teddy bears sitting around a conference table. It's a film to gull fans of the old TV series and perplex anyone else. I can't remember another Friday morning show where I heard actual cries of "Ah!" on the way out the door, and finished her review with, "At a pared down, barely rational 100 minutes, The Avengers is short, but not short enough." David Bianculli said, "This Avengers film is so horrendously, painfully, and thoroughly awful, it gives other cinematic clunkers like Ishtar and Howard the Duck a good name." Alan Jones in the Radio Times stated, "The cult 1960s TV series gets royally shafted by Hollywood in this stunningly designed blockbuster that's stunningly awful in every other department. Terrible special effects and zero chemistry between Fiennes and Thurman make this notorious disaster a total waste of everyone's time and energy." The Avengers also shared a Razzie Award for Worst Remake or Sequel with the 1998 adaptations of Psycho and Godzilla at the 19th Golden Raspberry Awards. Total Film magazine later voted Fiennes and Thurman in The Avengers as the worst movie double act of all time. The film also appeared on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films. Fatal Deviation is often credited as being the first martial arts film to be filmed in Ireland. It stars martial artist James Bennett and Michael Graham, who is best known for being a member of the boy band Boyzone. The Irish Post and Den of Geek write that it is a mainstay of worst film lists. Luke McKinney of Cracked.com called it the worst film ever made, writing, "There are so many things about making a movie that Jimmy doesn't know that you could replace film school with this movie alone. Just screening it once for students and asking them to list all the things it did wrong. Anyone who doesn't write everything instantly fails." The Irish Post named it the worst Irish film of all time. The Irish Independent wrote that it is regarded as one of the worst films ever made, and Comic Book Resources called it one of the worst commercial movies ever made. Entertainment.ie placed it on its list of 10 so bad they're good movies you need to see before you die, and it was covered in Paste's Bad Movie Diaries column. The British black comedy Parting Shots was the last film directed by Michael Winner. It starred rock musician Chris Ree as a man who, after being told he has only 6 months to live, begins murdering people who have wronged him. Andrew Collins took a very negative review of the film. Parting Shots is going to set the course of British filmmaking back 20 years. It is not only the worst British film produced in this country since Carry On Emmanuel, it is a thoroughbred contender for the crown of worst film ever made. In an interview about the film, Charlotte O'Sullivan, the Independent's film editor, claimed Parting Shots was the worst film I've ever seen. O'Sullivan also criticized it for its glorifying vigilantism. It's Michael Winner and, he doesn't have any sense of irony. He seems to be saying it's okay to go and kill people. The journalist Miles Kington later claimed Parting Shots was directed by Michael Winner, and despite the glittering cast, was possibly the worst film ever made. IQ Hunter listed Parting Shots as one of the candidates for the worst British film ever made. Parting Shots was also featured in a poll of Empire magazine readers' 50 Worst Movies Ever poll. The underground comedy movie is based on a cable access show from 1988. Director and lead actor Vince Offer constructed the film out of a series of tasteless, lowbrow skits. In 1999, Offer filed a lawsuit against 20th Century Fox and the co-directors of There's Something About Mary, Bobby and Peter Farrelly, claiming that 14 scenes in Mary were stolen from his film. The Farrellys released their statement, "We've never heard of him, we've never heard of his movie, and it's all a bunch of baloney." Lawrence Van Gelder of the New York Times referred to it as a wretched film and stated that the underground comedy movie stands as a monument to ineptitude and self-delusion. Rod Dreher of the New York Post said it may be the least amusing comedy ever made. Dave Shulman of LA Weekly described it as a serious contender for the single worst movie ever made, while Stinger's Bad Movie Awards co-founder Mike Lancaster said that it was the worst film he had ever paid to see. Nathan Rabin covered the film in his column detailing terrible films and stated that nothing I've covered for this column was quite as soul-crushingly, brain-meltingly terrible as the underground comedy movie. Fon Bennett at Film Journal International wrote, "Anyone offended by unbearably bad films, jokes that are not funny and wasting 90 minutes of their lives is, as promised, guaranteed to be offended. In fact, to even call this mess a comedy is giving it far too much credit, and the underground comedy movie may well be the worst film I've ever seen." Writing in Central Western Daily, Peter Young said, "I am pretty sure that I can declare this the worst film I have ever seen." Alright, now, before we get into the films from the 21st century, aka the new millennium and beyond, I'm going to do a short intermission where the following ads are going to be shown, and during them, you have to think out of all the movies I've covered from the 1930s to the 1990s, which one you've seen before is worst to you, and why. In fact, this isn't the first time I've done an intermission during a documentary. The first time I actually did it was in that Hoyts film, which is very short, only running for 15 minutes. But as for this you're watching right now, my god, it will go on like this for 2 to 3 hours. Anyways, do not leave me behind. I'll be back right after these ads. And go!
Let's do it.
Nothing beats an LJet Capital holiday, and right now, you can save $50 per person. That's approximately $200 off for a family of 4. We have hundreds of thousands of free child place holidays available, with 22 kilos of luggage included, depending on which size it is, because I don't care how big that ass is. Book today with LJet Capital, where traveling comes together. Videos. Videos. Videos. DVDs. Blu-rays. And 4K Ultra HDs. Videos. Available at your local second-hand shop. Now. In the 1980s, professional wrestler Andre the Giant once took the world's biggest poo on a plane, which caused people to puke and scream. He had a condition called gigantism, which saw him come in standing at a whopping 7 feet, 4 inches tall, and 236 kilograms weight. In fact, doing the biggest poo ever is disgusting. And that's the ad. Authorized by the Australian Government, Canberra. Wow! 3 of those ads were just fan-made ones, but the first one is just an actual PSA. But overall, the intermission went pretty quick, right? Anyways, get ready for another big ride, because we've opened the door to the new millennium. And it looks like there's 23 bad movies from this decade that have to be covered because this chapter is so big, and I want to do this very, very badly. 2006 will have to be skipped ahead, sorry. Battlefield Earth is based on the first half of L. Ron Hubbard's 1982 novel of the same name, and stars John Travolta, Barry Pepper, and Forest Whitaker. Although a sequel covering the second half of the book was planned, the panning from critics, poor box office performance, and financial ruin of Franchise Pictures killed off such plans. It was criticized for a poor script, hammy acting, overuse of Dutch angles, repetitive dialogue, and several inconsistencies and plot holes. The movie's producer, Franchise Pictures, was later forced out of business after it emerged that it had fraudulently overstated the film's budget by $31 million. It has a 3% rating at Rotten Tomatoes, where it is included in the top 100 worst reviewed movies of all time. Roger Ebert predicted that the film, for decades to come, will be the punchline of jokes about bad movies. Ebert also wrote, "The director, Roger Christian, has earned from better films that directors sometimes tilt their cameras, but he has not learned why." It is also on his most hated list. Nathan Rabin covered the film as part of his My World of Flops column for the AV Club, calling it a fiasco that occupies a distinguished place high atop the pantheon of widely reviled crap, and said, "A legendary disaster well before it finished completion, Battlefield Earth hit cinemas with a Kick Me song on it. So massive, it could be detected from outer space." It won 7 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture and Worst Screen Couple. In 2005, an 8th Razzie was awarded to the film, and in 2010 it won a 9th Razzie at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Picture of the Decade. Listing the film as one of the worst decisions in movie history, Rolling Stone equipped that if Earth sticks around long enough for the Golden Raspberry Awards to hand out a Worst Movie of the Century at that 2100 ceremony, it'll probably win that too. It won more Razzies than any film in the history of the awards at the time, until Jack and Jill surpassed its record with 10 wins in 2012. The movie appeared on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, and is on the movie review Query Engine's 50 Worst Movies list, as well as worst film lists from Screen Rant, Vanity Fair, Flavorwire, Digital Trends, and the New York Daily News. Empire named it the second worst movie ever made, after Batman and Robin, and Register listed it as the worst movie ever made. Pepper and Whitaker both expressed regret for their involvement in Battlefield Earth, while film screenwriter J. David Shapiro later apologized for making the suckiest movie ever. Titanic, The Legend Goes On is an Italian animated mockbuster about the sinking of the RMS Titanic. It features a similar romantic storyline to James Cameron's 1997 Titanic film, which in fact is one of my favorite movies of all time, but also has a number of talking animals. Reviews condemn the quality of the animation and criticize the plot for being insensitive to the memory of the victims of the Titanic. Title film named Titanic, The Legend Goes On as officially the worst film ever made, after a top 10 list of the 66 worst films ever. An article from Collider also described it as one of the worst films ever made, but notes that it lacks the cult following that other bad films often acquire, stating Titanic The Legend Goes On is too heinous for such fond pleasures. Critic Tim Brayton said that it is one of the most surely bad films I've ever encountered, adding, "For sheer mesmerizing grotesqueness, there's almost nothing I can name that beats it, and no fan of bad movies can say that their life is complete till they've been exposed to it." Total Film also included the film on the list of worst kids movies, describing it as being widely considered one of the worst animated films ever made, while Spanish film magazine Fotogramas selected it as one of the 20 worst films ever made. Screen Rant included it on a list of the 12 worst animated films of all time, and it topped a Showbiz cheat sheet list of the top 10 worst animated films ever, with author Will Roberts commenting that any list of the worst animated films of all time begins with Titanic, The Legend Goes On. In 2012, Titanic, The Legend Goes On became the lowest rated film on IMDb's bottom 100 list. The comedy film Freddy Got Fingered stars Tom Green, who also wrote and directed it, featuring largely gross out and shock humor similar to that featured in The Tom Green Show. In the film, Green stars as a 28-year-old slacker and cartoonist who forcibly accuses his father of child molestation when he questions his son's life goals. Freddy Got Fingered received overwhelmingly negative reviews, with CNN critic Paul Clinton declaring it, quite simply, the worst movie ever released by a major studio in Hollywood history. Warren Epstein of the Gazette described Freddy Got Fingered as the worst movie ever made. A review in the Washington Post said, "If ever a movie testified to the utter creative bankruptcy of the Hollywood film industry, it is the abomination known as Freddy Got Fingered." Roger Ebert included the film on his most hated list, gave it 0 out of 4 stars, and wrote, "This movie doesn't skirt the bottom of the barrel. This movie isn't the bottom of the barrel. This movie isn't below the bottom of the barrel. this movie doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence with Barrels. Freddy Got Fingered was nominated for 8 awards at the 2001 Razzies and won for Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, and Worst On-Screen Couple. Razzies founder John J.B. Wilson called it offensive, stupid, and obnoxious and said it had no redeeming value. Green accepted his awards in person, traveling to the ceremony in a white Cadillac, wearing a tuxedo and rolling out his own red carpet to the presentation. The movie has an 11% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. In 2010, the film was nominated at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Picture of the Decade, though it lost to Battlefield Earth. Freddy Got Fingered also appeared on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest-scoring films, was featured in Empire's list of the 50 Worst Movies Ever poll, and is on the MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list. Starring Mariah Carey in the lead role as an aspiring singer in 1980s New York City, the romantic musical drama Glitter was intended to be her breakthrough role, but was a critical failure and a box office bomb. Hindustan Times claimed that Glitter was slammed by almost all critics for being the worst film ever. Fadin stated that Glitter isn't just one of the worst music-themed films ever, it's one of the worst films ever made. Period. Author Bob McCann wrote in Encyclopedia of African American Actresses in Film and Television that it's rightfully in the running as one of the worst films ever made. News.com.au, High, Flavorwire, Screen Rant, Vanity Fair, Metacritic, and Empire are amongst those who have listed it as one of the worst films ever made. Glitter received 6 Razzie nominations, and Carey won for Worst Actress. It was also featured in the official Razzie Movie Guide, and in 2005, it was nominated for Worst Musical of Our First 25 Years, but lost to From Justin to Kelly. In an interview in 2010, Carey stated that she believed that the film's failure at the box office was largely due to the soundtrack being released the same day as the September 11 attacks. It has a 6% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 87 reviews. A remake of a 1974 Italian film of the same name, the romantic comedy film Swept Away was directed by Guy Ritchie and starred his then wife Madonna and Adriano Giannini. It received overwhelmingly negative reviews, with most of the criticism going towards Madonna's bad acting, the original film being considered superior, and the remake being considered just the star vehicle for Madonna. Rex Reed of the New York Observer said, "If there's one thing worse than a Guy Ritchie movie, it's a Guy Ritchie movie with Madonna in it." Newsday critic John Anderson said, "New ways of describing badness need to be invented to describe exactly how bad it is." Joe Queenan of The Guardian discussed the movie in an article on what makes a movie the worst of all time and said, "Showgirls has a certain campy allure that grows a bit each time I see it. Madonna's Swept Away doesn't. It seems more amateurish on each viewing, like a morass that starts out as a quagmire, then morphs into a cesspool, and finally turns into a slime pit on the road to its ultimate destination in the bowels of hell." Julie Burchill, also from The Guardian, selected it as her pick for worst film ever made. Swept Away was also a box office bomb against a $10 million budget. It grossed $598,000 in the United States and around $437,000 from foreign territories for a worldwide total gross of $1 million. It received 5 awards at the 23rd Golden Raspberry Awards and became the first film to win both Worst Picture and Worst Remake or Sequel. At the 25th Golden Raspberry Awards, it was nominated for Worst Drama of Our First 25 Years, and at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards, it was nominated for Worst Picture of the Decade, but lost to Battlefield Earth at both ceremonies. Empire ranked it number 20 in its list of the 50 worst movies ever, and After Ellen ranked it number 7 in its list of the worst movies ever to grace the screen. The comedy film The Master of Disguise was produced in part by Adam Sandler and stars Dana Carvey as Pistachio Disguisi, an undercover Italian waiter who must save his father Fabrizio from the evil Devlin Bowman by using his inherent skills in disguise. Although the film was a box office success, it received scathing reviews from critics upon its release, many of which pointed out its sophomoric plot, unfunny humor, and disguises that would clearly not be recognized by children. Many critics also pointed out the short running time, consisting of 72 minutes of the film itself and over 10 minutes of end credits, juxtaposed with outtakes, including 2 post-credit scenes. Roger Ebert gave it 1 star out of 4, claiming the movie is a desperate miscalculation. It gives poor Dana Carvey nothing to do that is really funny, and then expects us to laugh because he acts so goofy all the time. Alan Morrison, running for Empire, proclaimed that The Master of Disguise was the worst film ever made, a film about idiots, made by idiots, for idiots, while Matthew Turner of View London remarked, "This is a serious contender for the title of the worst film ever made." The film holds a 1% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 104 reviews, and is featured on the site's list of the top 100 worst reviewed films of all time. It also appears on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, and is on the MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list. A cameo appearance by Bo Derek landed her nomination for Worst Supporting Actress at the 23rd Golden Raspberry Awards, but she lost to Madonna for Die Another Day. The action film Ballistic, X vs. Sever, stars Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu as opposing secret agents. Critics pandered, generally regarding it as having no redeeming features, not even the unintentional comedic value normally associated with bad films. They variously described the film as a picture for idiots, boring to an amazing degree, a fine achievement in stupidity and dullness, dreadful, giving new meaning to the word incoherent, and bad on just about every level. One critic suggested an alternative title as simplistic, Bullets vs. Humans. Stephen Hunter of the Washington Post wrote, "You can run this film backward, soundtrack included, and it will make no less sense." Roger Ebert called the movie a chaotic mess, overloaded with special effects and explosions, light on continuity, sanity, and coherence. In addition to being lambasted by critics, it was a disaster financially, recouping just over $19.9 million of its $70 million budget. In March 2007, Rotten Tomatoes ranked it number 1 among the worst of the worst movie list, with 108 rotten reviews and no fresh ones. Ballistic, X vs. Sever remains the worst reviewed film on Rotten Tomatoes, as it is at the top of their 100 worst films of all time list. Mental Floss has also nominated it as the worst movie ever made, and Ebert included it in its most hated list. A low-budget 2002 American romantic drama film about the titular gay couple who come into conflict with Arthur's religious brother, Ben and Arthur was written, directed, produced, edited, and scored by Sam Ralvik, who also played the character Arthur. Ben and Arthur received strong criticism for its low budget and poor plotting. BuzzFeed described it as the worst gay movie of all time. The gay popular culture site Queenie described Ben and Arthur as unintelligible and ended its review by calling it the worst movie ever. The gay movie review site Cinema Queer likewise stated, Ben and Arthur is so terrible that it has awoken a dormant Betty Davis in me. It is so painfully bad that it wouldn't even make good fodder on Mystery Science Theater 3000. This just might possibly be the worst movie I have ever seen. Unless you get a kick out of mocking bad films, avoid this one at all costs. Michael Adams, reviewing the film for his book Showgirls, Teen Wolves, and Astro Zombies, describes it thus, Ben and Arthur is as over-the-top insane as it is ludicrously executed. The production values, from biscuits on plates comprising the main course of a candlelit dinner, to a church literally having a cardboard cross and a cartoon Jesus on the wall, are as bad as anything I've seen. A Rotten Tomatoes article placed Ben and Arthur on their list of films so bad they're unmissable, saying, if Tommy Wiseau's The Room is the overwrought, melodramatic, and self-pitying heterosexual camp classic of choice, then Sam Ralvich's Ben and Arthur is its gay equivalent. Rotten Tomatoes also stated, every scene, every line, every hissy fit is simultaneously hilariously amateur and hysterically fever-pitched. Total Film ranks Ben and Arthur at number 58 in their list of the 66 worst films of all time. Bravik finds Ben and Arthur's placement among the canon of worst films to be a blessing as the film received more attention than he ever anticipated. The romantic comedy musical from Justin to Kelly stars Kelly Clarkson and Justin Guarini, the winner and runner-up respectively of the first season of American Idol. The film was a critical and commercial disaster, earning only $4.9 million at the North American box office and achieving an 8% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 63 reviews. Josh Tyrangiel of Time magazine described From Justin to Kelly as a monstrous idol movie musical that in the most generous light is the worst film so far this century, while the Freelance Star referred to it as the world's worst movie. Nathan Rabbing, reviewing the film for his My Year of Flop series, stated, "All films require suspension of disbelief. From Justin to Kelly requires something more like a temporarily lobotomy. Nothing about the main characters or their relationships makes sense. It won a special Razzie Governor's Award, Distinguished Underachievement in Choreography, at the 24th Golden Raspberry Awards. It was nominated for 8 additional Razzies, and a year later, it won for Worst Musical of our first 25 years. Total Film, Screen Rant, and Digital Trends included from Justin to Kelly on their worst film lists." In a later interview, Clarkson expressed regret over From Justin to Kelly, stating she only did it because she was contractually obligated to do so. "I knew when I read the script it was going to be real bad, but when I won, I signed that piece of paper and I could not get out of it."
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
The independently produced The Room, about an amiable banker whose friends betray him one by one, has been called the Citizen Kane of bad movies by some critics. The Guardian, Vox, The Washington Post, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and Süddeutsche Zeitung call it the worst film ever made. Ignatiy Vishnevetsky of the AV Club called it the greatest bad movie of our time and said, "The Room is nearly an anti-film, an insane, unintentionally surreal soap opera filled with non-sequiturs, confused characters, and gratuitous, anatomically incorrect sex." Though the film star, writer, producer, and director Tommy Wiseau has claimed it is a black comedy and its numerous flaws are intentional, other actors involved in the production have denied this, saying that Wiseau intended it as a melodramatic romance. The Room has been noted for its bizarre and non-sequitorial dialogue, protracted sex scenes, various subplots that are inadequately resolved or simply disappear, and infamous use of green screen for outdoor rooftop scenes. It made its broadcast premiere as an April Fool's Day special in 2009 on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block, edited down from its original R rating to a TV-14 DSLV rating. It would prove so popular that the network continued to air the film on April 1 as a tradition for several years, to the point that 2012 prank for the network consisted of playing the first few minutes before suddenly cutting off for an unannounced one-night revival of their Toonami block, with block host Tom first greeting the audience as Wiseau's character does, declaring,
Oh, hi, Adult Swim.
The day after its appearance, its DVD became the top-selling independent film on Amazon.com. In June 2010, The Room started playing at the American Film Institute Silver Theater in Silver Spring, Maryland. Mystery Science Theater 3000 alumni Michael J. Nelson, Kevin Murphy, and Bill Corbett produced an audio commentary track to accompany the movie through their site rifftracks.com. In 2013, the book The Disaster Artist, written by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell, was published. The book is Sestero's memoir of his involvement in the production of the movie. The book was adapted into the Oscar-nominated film with the same name, directed by and starring James Franco as Wiseau and his brother Dave Franco as Sestero. A remake starring Bob Odenkirk was set to be released in June 2023 to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the film's release, but was delayed. The modern breast movie Giggly features Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, with appearances by Al Pacino and Christopher Walken. Giggly was originally a black comedy with no romantic subplot, but the producers demanded script rewrites throughout filming, hoping to cash in on the Lopez-Affleck romance that was then big news in celebrity-watching publications such as Us and People. This film cost $54 million to make, but grossed only $6 million, making it one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. The Times gave the film a 0, making Giggly the lowest scored film review in the publication's history at the time. The Wall Street Journal stated that it was the worst movie, the worst allegedly major movie, of our admittedly young century, while Roger Friedman of Fox News claimed it was the worst movie ever made. It was also the winner of 7 Razzies, and in 2010, the film was nominated at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Picture of the Decade. It is in Rotten Tomatoes' top 100 worst reviewed movies of the 2000s, where it has a 6% rating. After Ellen ranked Giggly number 1 in its list of the worst films of all time. Empire, Screen Rant, and Digital Trends also listed it as one of the worst films ever made. The The 2004 British sex comedy Sex Lives of the Potato Men is about the sex lives of a group of potato delivery men in Birmingham. The film received strongly hostile reviews from the British media. Reviews claimed Sex Lives of the Potato Men was unfunny, disgusting, and depressing. Writing in the Daily Mirror, film critic Kevin O'Sullivan called Sex Lives of the Potato Men one of the worst films ever made. Novelist Will Self, in his review for the Evening Standard, called Sex Lives of the Potato Men mirthless, worthless, toothless, useless. The Times reviewer James Christopher dubbed Sex Lives of the Potato Men one of the 2 most nauseous films ever made. A masterclass in filmmaking ineptitude. The Sunday Express film critic, Henry Fitzherbert, also strongly condemned the film. Sex Lives is so awful it left me slack-jawed in disbelief. It must be one of the worst British comedies. Catherine Shard, in a critique in the Sunday Telegraph, stated, "It's hard to know what to say to this. It's like finding the right words at a nasty accident. Sex Lives of the Potato Men is probably the lewdest Britcom since Confessions of a Window Cleaner, and certainly the worst." Showard also described the film as less a film than an appetite suppressant. Alan Morrison in the Scottish Daily Record described it as puerile smut of very worst kind. Sex Lives of the Potato Men should never have been made. The Irish Times later noted that Sex Lives of the Potato Men attracted some of the worst reviews in living memory. The Birmingham Post described Sex Lives of the Potato Men as quite possibly the worst film ever made, while The Independent on Sunday stated that the film was a strong contender for the title of worst film of all time. It was also featured on Empire's 50 Worst Movies Ever poll, and the film has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 14 reviews. Nominally based on the DC Comics character, Catwoman stars Halle Berry as the title character. The film was the result of various rewrites by a total of 28 different screenwriters, though only 4 were credited after arbitration with the Writers Guild of America. It has an 8% rating at Rotten Tomatoes and was declared, arguably, the worst superhero film ever made by the Orlando Sentinel. Jean Lowerson of the San Diego Metropolitan said in her review that Catwoman goes on my worst list for the year and quite possibly for all time. Sadaf Ahsan of the National Post went further, calling it the worst movie ever made. The Village Voice summed up reviews of the film under the title, Meouch! The movie was the winner of 4 Razzies for Worst Picture, Worst Actress, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. Berry arrived at the ceremony to accept her Razzie in person, saying,
"First of all, I want to thank Warner Brothers. Thank you for putting me in a piece of shit, god-awful movie. You know, it was just what my career needed, you know?"
Roger Ebert included it in his most hated list, being joined by Screen Rant and Flavorwire, who also included it in their worst film lists. The German film Daniel der Zauberer, The Wizard, was directed by Elie Lommel and stars pop singer and ex-Deutschland Suck 10 superstar contestant Daniel Koppelbach, who also appeared as a fictionalized version of himself. The Daily Dot wrote that it is considered to be the worst German film, while NTV said it was possibly the worst movie ever made. The website filmstarts.de states that Daniel the Wizard was unbearable for non-fans of Koppelbach, adding that the performances of the actors were some of the worst in the history of German cinema, and alleging that Elie Lommel and producer Peter Schaimoni had damaged their reputation. Years after its release, Koppelbach admitted that, in retrospect, you have to say this is the worst movie of all time, really. The film also performed extremely poorly at the box office, having only 13,000 viewers altogether, which led to it being withdrawn from screening at most cinemas within the first week, with RP Online referring to it as a super flop. It is consistently listed at IMDb's bottom 100 list, and became the lowest rated film at one point. Total Film listed it as the 3rd worst film of all time, after Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2, and the direct-to-video animated blockbuster Titanic: The Legend Goes On, while Photogrammers and the New York Daily News included it on their worst film lists. Filmstarts.de ranked it number 4 in its list of the 25 worst movies ever made, and on the German movie rating site movieplotpilot.de, it is the lowest rated film with an average rating of 0.4 out of 10. In 2016, it was showcased on Schlafers, a German television show featuring the worst films ever made. The family-oriented comedy Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2 was the last film directed by Bob Clark before his death. It is a sequel to the 1999 film Baby Geniuses, and like its predecessor, it received negative reviews from film critics. Following the plot of the first film, 4 babies can communicate with each other using baby talk and have knowledge of many secrets. The Baby Geniuses became involved in a scheme by media mogul Bill Biscayne, a notorious kidnapper of children who intends to use a satellite system to brainwash the world's population and force them to watch TV for the rest of their lives. The film was a box office bomb, only receiving $9 million from its $20 million budget. Movie web writer B. Alan Orange considers it the worst movie ever made. Entertainment Weekly writer Joshua Rivers stated that it was the worst movie he had ever had to sit through, and Tom Long of the Deseret News said, "It is perhaps the most incompetent and least funny comic film ever made." It was nominated for 4 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Supporting Actor, and Worst Screenplay. Total Film named it the runner-up to Titanic, The Legend Goes On, in its list of the worst films ever made, and Mental Floss selected it as the second worst film movie ever made after Ballistic, X vs. Sever. It was ranked as the worst sequel of all time by Rotten Tomatoes, and with a score of 0%, it is included in their list of the 100 worst movies of all time. Loosely based on a series of video games by Infogrames and directed by Uwe Boll, the German-Canadian-American film Alone in the Dark was panned by critics for a multitude of reasons, including poor script and production values, quick cuts to optimize the gory content, almost no connection to the game, and bad acting. The movie received a 1% rating at Rotten Tomatoes, was the second worst reviewed movie of the 2000s, and appears in their top 100 worst reviewed movies list. It appeared on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, which they gave a 9 out of 100 to, is on the MRQE's 50 worst movies list, and is one of the few films to have received an F rating on CinemaScore. Roger Moore of the Orlando Sentinel stated, "Alone in the Dark shows just how tenuous Plan 9 from Outer Space's Hold On, that worst movie ever title really is." Likewise, Peter Hardlub, the San Francisco Chronicle's pop culture critic, called the film the best Ed Wood movie ever made, a film so mind-blowingly horrible that it teeters on the edge of cinematic immortality. In 2009, he named it the worst film of the decade. Jeffrey Lyles of the Gazette considered it so bad that other legendary bad films await a film of this magnitude because it gets awfully lonely on the island of misfit movies, while Scott Nash of Free Movie Buffs dubbed it one of the worst movies ever made. Screenwriter Blair Erickson wrote about his experience dealing with Boll and his original script, which was closer to the actual game itself, and Boll's script change demands on the comedy website Something Awful. It received 2 2005 Golden Raspberry Awards nominations for Worst Director and Worst Actress, and won 3 2005 Stingers Awards for Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Special Effects. Empire, Flavorwire, and Screen Rant all later included the film on their respective lists for the worst films ever made. Ag is a remake of one of the most successful Hindi films, Sholay, directed by Ram Gopal Varma. Rajiv Masand gave it a 0 out of 5. Tom Zavinia stated that Ag destroyed Bollywood's greatest film and acknowledged that some consider it the world's worst film. Hindustan Times awarded it the Lifetime's Worst Ever Movie Award. It came in first in an FHM India list of the 57 worst movies ever made. Total Film included it in their list of the 66 worst films of all time. Amitabh Bachchan, who appeared in the original film and returned for the remake, later admitted that the film was a mistake. Epic Movie is a parody film by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer that mainly parodies epic and fantasy movies, most notably The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, The Witch and the Wardrobe, and the Harry Potter films, but also contains references to all kinds of other then popular films. Like most works by Friedberg and Seltzer, it received extremely negative reviews, holding an approval rating of 2% on Rotten Tomatoes and a Metacritic score of 17 out of 100, indicating overwhelming dislike. Harry Fletcher of The Standard said, "Filmmakers and trash peddlers Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer have been responsible for some of the most pointless, lazy, and unforgivable movies of the past decade, and frankly, they need to be stopped. Disaster Movie, 300 spoof Meet the Spartans, and awful Hunger Games Mickey take The Starving Games could easily have made this list of the worst movies ever made, but Epic Movie might be the worst of the lot." Meanwhile, Jamie Russell of the BBC called it the most excruciating, unfunny film you'll see this year, if not your entire lifetime. Likewise, Nathan Rabin gave it an F score and said, "Epic Movie strays so far from the solid fundamentals of filmmaking that have caused the very foundation of humour into question." At the 28th Golden Raspberry Awards, it received 3 nominations for Worst Remake or Ripoff, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Supporting Actress. It is included in Rotten Tomatoes' list of the 100 worst movies of all time, Empire's and Flavorwire's list of the 50 worst movies ever made, Standard's list of the 12 worst films ever made, MRQE's 50 worst movies list, and Newsweek's list of the 50 worst comedy movies of all time. I Know Who Killed Me is a psychological thriller film directed by Chris Sivertson and starring Lindsay Lohan as identical twins, one of whom insists her identity is that of another woman after being abducted by a serial killer. At the 28th Golden Raspberry Awards, it set a record for most awards won in a single year by winning 8 awards, and it received 2 further nominations at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards. The How Did This Get Made podcast questioned, "Is this the worst movie Lindsay Lohan has ever been in, or flat out the worst movie ever?" Richard Roeper selected the film as the worst of the 2000s. Gabe Delahaye of Stereo Gum reviewed I Know Who Killed Me as part of his search for the worst movie ever made, writing that out of all the possible worst movies of all time so far, none has been as painful to actually watch as I Know Who Killed Me. It was named the 34th worst movie ever made in Empire's 50 Worst Movies Ever poll, and after Ellen named it, the 2nd worst movie ever made, after Giggly. MRQE includes it on its 50 worst movies list, and it has a rare F rating on CinemaScore. Disaster Movie is a parody film written and directed by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, spoofing films in the disaster film genre. The film, like most films by Friedberg and Seltzer, received extremely negative reviews and has a 1% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 73 reviews. The site's consensus states, "Returning to their seemingly bottomless well of flatulence humor, racial stereotypes, and stale pop culture gags, Friedberg and Seltzer have produced what is arguably their worst movie yet." It was ranked by Rotten Tomatoes as one of the worst reviewed films of all time. Jason Solomons of The Guardian stated that nothing can convey the grimness of Disaster Movie, which would be the worst movie ever made were it actually a movie at all. Adam Tobias of Watertown Daily Times claimed that "I just don't see how anyone could not find Disaster Movie one of the worst films of all time." Tobias went on to write that the title was appropriate because the film is a disaster. It was featured in Empire's 50 Worst Movies Ever poll, Total Film's 66 Worst Movies Ever list, Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, and the MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list. Disaster Movie also received a rare F rating on CinemaScore. The film is also notable for being the motion picture debut of Kim Kardashian, whose performance garnered a nomination for Worst Supporting Actress at the 29th Golden Raspberry Awards alongside 5 additional nominations. Another 2008 parody movie by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, Meet the Spartans mainly parodied the movie 300, with references to numerous other films as well. Like most Friedberg and Seltzer projects, it received extremely negative reviews, holding an approval rating of 2% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a consensus rating, "A tired, unfunny, offensive waste of time, Meet the Spartans scrapes the bottom of the cinematic barrel," and a Metacritic score of 9 out of 100, indicating overwhelming dislike. Josh Levin of Slate called it the worst movie he had ever seen. It is included in Empire's and Flavorwire's lists of the 50 worst movies ever made, News.com.au's list of the 15 worst films of all time, Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, and MRQE's 50 worst movies list. At the 29th Golden Raspberry Awards, it received 5 nominations, including Worst Picture. The romantic comedy The Hottie and the Noddy, starring Paris Hilton, Joel Moore, Christine Lakin, and Greg Wilson, opened to poor box office takings and strongly negative reviews, with a 6% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The British newspaper The People, reviewing The Hottie and the Noddy, claimed Paris Hilton is the world's worst actress and she's starring in the worst movie ever made. Nathan Lee of The Village Voice called it crass, shill, disingenuous, tawdry, mean-spirited, vulgar, idiotic, boring, slapdash, half-assed, and very, very unfunny. Online film critic James Berardinelli described the film's comedy as about as funny as the anal rape scene in The War Zone. Richard Roeper called it excruciatingly, painfully, horribly, terribly awful, and argued that nobody in this movie really should have a career in movies. Connie Ogle in the Miami Herald described The Hottie and the Noddy fuss: imagine the worst movie you've ever seen. Got it? Now, try to think of something worse. That something is this movie, wretched, embarrassing, and a waste of time, and energy of everyone involved. The film appears on Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films, and the MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list. Along.net, aka Dreamwell, aka Dream.net, is a Hungarian film that emulates tropes found in American teen films. 444.who wrote that it is the worst movie of all time, and that's why it became a cult film. Furthermore, 24.who and Index.who each named it the worst Hungarian film ever made, and the Irish Times reported its status as the worst film of all time when it became the lowest rated film on IMDb. Total Film named it the 4th worst film ever made, and FMC.who included it on their list of the 10 worst films ever made. That was a lot of fun covering those crappy movies from the noughties. Now we're moving on to this decade, which is the 2010s, and there's about 16 of them to cover. Forget 2015 and 2018, they're skipped. An independently produced film that is an apparent homage to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, Birdemic, Shock and Terror tells the story of a romance between the two leading characters, played by Alan Bagg and Whitney Moore, as their small town is attacked by birds. Written, directed, and produced by James Guyon, it was intended as a romantic thriller, but is notable due to its poor quality, with reviewers calling out its wooden acting, bad dialogue, amateurish sound and editing, nonsensical plot, and in particular, its special effects, consisting primarily of poorly rendered computer-generated eagles and vultures that perform physically awkward aerial maneuvers and explode upon impact with the ground. The film, which cost $10,000 to make, was called by the Huffington Post truly one of the worst films ever made, and by the Village Voice as one more in a pantheon of beloved trash to pieces. Flavor Wire ranked it number 1 in its list of the 50 worst films ever made. Slate deemed it among the worst movies ever made, while Sullen referred to it as a cult hit among bad movie fans, and Variety stated that the film displayed all the revered hallmarks of hilariously bad filmmaking. Following the home media release of Birdemic, Michael J. Nelson, Kevin Murphy, and Bill Corbett of Mystery Science Theater 3000 fame produced an audio commentary track to accompany the movie through riff tracks. They later riffed upon the film again theatrically. In response to the cult status of the first film, a sequel, Birdemic 2: The Resurrection, was released in 2013 and included many returning members of the cast and crew. Another sequel was released on several streaming platforms on January 24, 2023, titled Birdemic: Sea Eagle. The Last Airbender is a fantasy adventure film written, produced, and directed by M. Night Shyamalan and is based on the Nickelodeon animated TV series Avatar: The Last Airbender. Upon release, the film was widely panned with critics pointing out the bad acting, numerous plot holes, screenplay, dialogue, poor visual effects, and especially Shyamalan's directing. It was also ridiculed for the poor quality of its post-converted 3D and the casting of white and Indian actors to portray characters who were interpreted as East Asian or Inuit in the source material, triggered accusations of racism and whitewashing. Further criticism came from fans of the animated series, who said the film differed tremendously from its critically acclaimed source material. David Onder of Comcast wrote that it has been called one of the worst films ever made. Roger Ebert called the film an agonizing experience in every category I can think of and others still wanting to be invented. The laws of chance suggest that something should have gone right. Not here. It puts a nail in the coffin of low-rent 3D, but it will need a lot more coffins than that. When asked if The Last Airbender had been the worst film he has ever seen, Mike Ryan of Vanity Fair answered, yes. It garnered 9 nominations at the 31st Golden Raspberry Awards and won 5, including Worst Picture and Worst Director. High highlighted the film in their Worst Films Ever series, and Rotten Tomatoes, Screen Rant, and Digital Trends included it in their Worst Film lists. Dev Patel would later express regret and dislike for his role and his experience with the film. He described his performance as Prince Zuko as being as though he saw a stranger on the screen that I couldn't relate to. Bucky Larson, Born to be a Star, was produced by Adam Sandler's Happy Madison Productions and featured Nick Swardson in the titular role as a small-town man-child who pursues a career in the pornographic film industry after learning that his parents were porn stars in the 1970s. On Rotten Tomatoes, Bucky Larson has a 3% rating, and it appears on the site's list of the 100 worst movies of all time. Linda Cook of the Quad City Times described the film as the worst of the worst, while Screen Crush critic Matt Singer picked it as the worst film ever made. Jim Vaughn of Paste's Bad Movie Diaries column suggested that Bucky Larson was the worst film covered by the column. In listing it as one of the 10 worst comedies ever, Michael Musto stated that Bucky Larson was a badness the world had forgotten was capable of existing. Screen Rant included it in its list of the 25 worst movies in film history, and Mental Floss named it the 5th worst movie ever. Bucky Larson also appears on MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list, and Metacritic's list of the all-time lowest scoring films. The film earned 6 nominations at the 32nd Golden Raspberry Awards, but lost in every category to Jack and Jill, the one that I'll get into right now, which was also produced by Happy Madison Productions. Jack and Jill is a comedy film starring Adam Sandler as Jack, a commercial director, who was visited by his identical twin sister, Jill, during the holidays. Salon stated that Jack and Jill received some of the worst reviews of any movie ever upon its release. In the film, Jill is wooed by Al Pacino, whom Jack wants to be in his Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Richard Roeper of the Chicago Sun-Times noted the irony of Pacino's presence, as the actor is best known for playing Michael Corleone in The Godfather, which is widely considered one of the best films ever made, in this film, which he called one of the worst movies in the history of cinema. Ramin said too of the Daily Beast and Peter Travers of Rolling Stone reviewed it together in an article entitled Adam Sandler's Jack and Jill is the worst movie ever made. After an hour-long critique, Red Letter Media claimed that it was so egregious that it ceased to be a film, and the site also later called it the worst thing in the world. Mike McGranagan wrote on his website The Aisle Seat, Howard the Duck, Giggly, Showgirls, From Justin to Kelly. What do they all have in common? They're all widely considered among the worst big studio movies ever made. You know what else they have in common? They're all better than Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill won a record 10 awards at the 32nd Golden Raspberry Awards, sweeping every category. It broke the record previously held by Battlefield Earth of having the most Razzies earned by a single film, and is the only film to win every possible award. The film holds a 3% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where it ranks as being one of the 100 worst movies of all time. Vanity Fair and Screen Rant have also included it on their respective worst film lists. Another comedy film starring Adam Sandler, That's My Boy, concerns a middle school student named Donnie Burkett who has sex with his teacher, gets her pregnant, and in turn earns a lifestyle of a minor celebrity, something he had never intended to happen. Years later, Donnie crashes his now adult son's wedding and bachelor party to get money to pay his taxes, therefore avoiding prison. The film has been widely panned due to its comedic portrayal of incest, pedophilia, statutory rape, and gerontophilia, with film critic Andrew O'Hare here of Salon stating, Sandler's new movie about a rape survivor and his estranged son is supposed to be funny, but radiates pain and rage. Richard Roeper of the Chicago Sun-Times proclaimed, to say That's My Boy is one of the worst movies of the year is to insult 2012. This is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, while Richard Hurriedly of Quick Flicks called it one of the most saddest and most exhausting films he has ever seen. Marianne Johansson of Flick Philosopher outright panned the film for its inability to generate laughs as well as its depraved content, calling it a disgusting excuse for a comedy, and possibly the most repulsive movie I've ever seen, and Jonathan Lack of We Got This Covered declared, That's My Boy isn't just the worst film of 2012, it's one of the most morally reprehensible comedies of all time, a disgusting movie you should stay far, far away from. Furthermore, Ed Whitfield of the Ooh Tray stated, it may be the worst film in any genre ever made. In addition to the movie's overwhelmingly negative reviews, That's My Boy earned 8 nominations at the 33rd Golden Raspberry Awards, such as Worst Picture and Worst Director, and won the awards for Worst Director and Worst Screenplay. It holds a 21% rating on Rotten Tomatoes as of today, based on 111 reviews. The animated comedy Food Fight, directed by Lawrence Kasanoff, features a cast of celebrity voice actors, including Charlie Sheen, Wayne Brady, Hilary Duff, and Eva Longoria. The film revolves around brand mascots, known as Ikes, who come to life in the supermarket after closing time, and their struggles against the forces of Brand X. Several actual corporate mascots make cameos in the movie, such as Mrs. Butterworth, Charlie the Tuna, and the California Raisins. Development for the movie began as early as 2000, but troubled production, including an incident where the hard drives had supposedly been stolen, and financial difficulties delayed its release several times. The film eventually received a limited theatrical release in Europe in 2012, and it became a box office bomb, earning just $74,000 against its reported $65 million budget. Food Fight was also critically panned for its animation, humor, use of product placement as a central theme, and content inappropriate for its target audience, such as sexual innuendo and references to Nazism. The New York Times condemned the film, saying, "The animation appears unfinished, and the plot is impenetrable and even offensive." The article also reported that Food Fight had been seized upon by internet purveyors of bad cinema. One such internet critic was Nathan Rabin of the AV Club, who included the film in his My World of Flops column, describing it as one of those fall of civilization moments, and this is the kind of movie so unbelievably, surreally, and exquisitely terrible that you want to share with the rest of the world. I was put on Earth to suffer through abominations like Food Fight so that society as a whole might benefit from my Christ-like sacrifice. Meanwhile, a review in Esquire described it as The Room, rendered in horribly sharp polygons, and Hollywood News called it, by far, the crappiest piece of crap I have ever had the misfortune to watch. Likewise, critic Tim Brayton described it as the absolute ugliest animated feature that has ever been released by something resembling an actual animation studio, one of the very worst movies I have ever seen. In 2024, Collider described it as the absolute worst movie of the 21st century, without any real competition. Digital Trends, Time Out, Photogrammers, Mental Floss, and MSN have since included Food Fight in their worst film lists. Rebecca Hawkes of the Daily Telegraph described Food Fight as the worst animated children's film ever made, while IndieWire, Comic Book Resources, and Screen Rant have each described it as being one of the worst animated films ever made. A British comedy film based on the stage farce of the same name, Run for Your Wife starred Danny Dyer as John Smith, a bigamist, and Denise Dan Alton and Sarah Harding as his wives. Run for Your Wife was directed by the author of the play, Ray Cooney. Upon release, Run for Your Wife was savaged by film critics, with the South African newspaper Daily News saying Run for Your Wife could be the worst film in history, the Studio Briefing website reporting that some writers are making the case that the British comedy may be the worst film ever, and the Daily Mirror claiming Run for Your Wife was rated the worst British film ever. Run for Your Wife met with such overwhelmingly negative reviews upon release that the reviews themselves were widely reported in the UK media. The film was variously described as a catastrophe, as funny as leprosy, and 30 years past its sell-by date, with The Guardian reviewer Peter Bradshaw saying that it makes the Dick Emery show look edgy and contemporary. The Independent's Anthony Quinn wrote, "The stage play ran for 9 years. It, the film, will be lucky to run for 9 days. Perhaps never in the field of light entertainment have so many actors sacrificed so much dignity in the course of so few jokes. From the look of it, Cooney hasn't been in the cinema for about 30 years. The cast featured numerous British celebrities in cameo roles, which was commented upon by several reviewers. The Metro commented that no one emerges unscathed among the cameo-packed cast that reads largely like a roll call for Brit TV legends you'd previously suspected, deceased. The Daily Record described the film as an exasperating farce containing not one single solitary laugh. Comprised of people losing their trousers and falling over, the film looks like a pilot for a never-commissioned 70s sitcom. An article in The Independent described Run for Your Wife as contenders for the title of the worst film in history. The Berkhamsted and Tring Gazette reported critics have been queuing up to batter recent release Run for Your Wife, with general agreement that it ranks among the worst British comedies of all time. Run for Your Wife was also a box office bomb, earning only £602 in its opening weekend at the British box office to its £900,000 budget. Run for Your Wife has a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes as of July 2015, based on 15 reviews. Fateful Findings is a 2012 independent techno-thriller written, directed, and produced by Neil Breen. Breen also starred in the film and took on most of the crew roles, including film editor, sound editor, accountant, caterer, set designer, wardrobe, makeup, and casting. The film follows an author-turned-hacker with supernatural powers who uses his abilities to reveal vague government and corporate secrets while beset by numerous relationship dramas, and ends with an extended sequence at a press conference where politicians and business people confess to corruption and kill themselves before an applauding crowd. Writing for Film Threat, reviewer Mike Hodges described it as the worst movie ever made, comparing it unfavorably to Troll 2 and The Room. Nathan Rabin, writing for Rotten Tomatoes, said Fateful Findings threatens The Room's position as best worst movie, while reviewers of the podcast The Flophouse said, "Move over The Room, move over Birdemic," and Mystery Science Theater 3000 head writer Elliot Callan described it as the goodest bad movie maybe I've ever seen. Paste Magazine said Fateful Findings sits right next to The Room on the Mount Rushmore of bad movies, and noted that while Tommy Wiseau had eventually embraced and encouraged mockery of The Room, Breen doesn't pretend to be in on it, and the film maintains a magic as sincere outsider art. Screen Rant and the New York Daily News later listed it as one of the worst films of all time. Produced and co-directed by Peter Farrelly, among the others, Movie 43 is a gross-out sex comedy film consisting of several vignettes, each by a different director, and a sizable cast of recognizable actors and actresses, including Dennis Quaid, Greg Kinnear, Hugh Jackman, Kate Winslet, Liv Schreiber, Naomi Watts, Anna Faris, Emma Stone, Richard Gere, Uma Thurman, Chloe Grace Moretz, Gerard Butler, Halle Berry, Stephen Merchant, Kristen Bell, Terrence Howard, Elizabeth Banks, Kate Bosworth, Johnny Knoxville, Justin Long, Chris Pratt, Josh Moore, and Jason Sudeikis. Oh my god, had to name a lot of it. Anyways, holding a score of 5% on Rotten Tomatoes, it is included on the site's 100 Worst Movies of All Time list, and it's also on the MRQE's 50 Worst Movies list. Movie 43 won 3 awards at the 34th Golden Raspberry Awards: Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. In the Worst Director category, all 13 directors won the award. Several critics have called it one of the worst films ever made, including Peter Howell of the Toronto Star, who said, "There's just one use for Movie 43, apart from it being grounded to the landfill, that it deserves to become sooner rather than later. It provides me with a handy new answer to a question I'm often asked. What's the worst film you've ever seen?" Freddie Murphy of Murphy Reviews wrote that the movie had no heart and gave it the site's first 0 out of 10 rating. Meanwhile, Richard Roeper of the Chicago Sun-Times voiced similar hatred, calling it aggressively tasteless and the Citizen Kane of awful. Lou Lomenick stated, "If you matched up the worst parts of the infamous Howard the Duck, Giggly, Ishtar, and every other awful movie I've seen since I've started reviewing professionally in 1991, it wouldn't begin to approach the sheer soul-sucking badness of the cringe-inducing Movie 43. Elizabeth Weitzman of the New York Daily News also considered it the worst movie she ever saw. A Bollywood comedy film directed by Sajid Khan, Hum Shackles featured Indian actors Saif Ali Khan, Ram Kapoor, and Ritesh Deshmukh. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 0% rating based on 6 reviews, with an average rating of 2 out of 10, or as IMDb says, 1.7 out of 10. Mihir Vadnavis wrote in his first post review, "Sexual tomfoolery, shrieking, and having aside, there's much more to hate about this family movie. It's disturbing to see such an atrocious, regressive, misogynistic, sexist, homophobic cinematic product force-fed to paying audiences. I can understand that a comedy need not to be safe, but what goes on in Hum Shackles is simply too horrifying to bear." Saurabh Dwivedi of India Today stated, "I can only say that Hum Shackles will be listed in one of the worst films of the century." Writing in Emirates 24/7, Sneha May Francis said that it succeeded Khan's previous endeavour, Himmatwala, in becoming the worst Bollywood film ever. Fadnavis went further, writing that it displaced Himmatwala as the worst possible product any film industry in the world can offer. Itrafsiad of the Georgia Straits stated that Humshuckles was the absolute bottom of the cinematic barrel. The film received 5 Golden Gala Award nominations and won the award for Worst Film. It also won 2 Guntar Awards. The film won Worst Picture, and Ram Kapoor, Saif Ali Khan, and Ritesh Deshmukh shared the Worst Actor award. Several of the cast members also lamented their involvement in the film. Despite being the film's leading actress, Bipasha Basu did not participate in the film's promotions because she was extremely disturbed by the end result and stated that Humshuckles was the worst experience of my life. Another cast member, actress Esha Gupta, warned her family to not watch the film. After the release of the film, leading actor Saif Ali Khan lamented that "I've been introspecting a lot and will never repeat a mistake that was Humshuckles." Saving Christmas is a faith-based Christmas comedy film starring Kirk Cameron, who plays a fictionalized version of himself attempting to convince his brother-in-law that Christmas is still a Christian holiday. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 0% rating based on 19 reviews, with an average rating of 2.40 out of 10. But on IMDb, it says 1.3 out of 10 again, similar to what Alum.net had. Critic David Keyes described Saving Christmas as the worst holiday movie ever made. Billings Gazette selected the film as the worst Christmas movie of all time, and Will Call of Digital Trends included it on its list of the 10 worst movies ever made. Christy Lemire picked Saving Christmas as the worst film she has ever reviewed, and called it the Room of Christmas movies, and gave it a score of 0 stars out of 4. Rhys Taylor of Comic Book Resources also considers it the worst film ever made. The film's history after release was further marred by widespread vote brigading. Cameron asked fans to give the film positive reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which resulted in a backlash of internet users, instead traveling to the Rotten Tomatoes page to review bomb the film. 3 weeks after its release, Saving Christmas became the lowest rated film on IMDb's bottom 100 list. Cameron blamed the low rating on a Reddit campaign by haters and aphists to purposely lower the film's ratings. The film won 4 awards, including Worst Picture at the 35th Golden Raspberry Awards. A 2014 English-language French drama film about the origins of a football world governing body, Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA for short, United Passions starred Tim Roth, Gerard Depardieu, and Sam Neill, and was directed by Frederick Albertin. United Passions release in the US occurred simultaneously with the 2015 FIFA corruption case, in which several current and former members of FIFA's executive committee were arrested on charges of corruption, and Blatter himself resigned following repeated accusations of corruption at FIFA under his leadership. United Passions was accused of ignoring these long-running claims. London Evening Standard's Des Kelly wrote that United Passions was the worst movie ever made and the most extraordinary vanity exercise, a vile, self-aggrandizing, sugar-coated pile of manure. Sean Mahoney of Inquisitor called it the worst movie ever. Daniel Gold of the New York Times claimed United Passions is one of the most unwatchable films in recent memory, a dishonest bit of corporate sweet sanitizing that's no good even for laughs, later stating it would make the top 3 of his list of all-time bad films. Several critics noted the irony of the film's depiction of Blatter as an anti-corruption campaigner. Paul Field of the Daily Mirror said that this created unintentional comedy gold. On Rotten Tomatoes, United Passions had an approval rating of 0% based on 16 reviews, while on Metacritic, the film holds a score of 1 out of 100 based on 9 critics, and is tied for the lowest scoring film on the site. Screen Rant subsequently included it on its list of the 25 worst movies of all time. United Passions was also a box office bomb, becoming the second lowest grossing film ever in American history, with a total take of $918, surpassed only by the 2006 thriller Zizek's Road, which only made $30 at the box office. The film additionally went directly to DVD in France and was not distributed in a number of other European countries. Several of the people involved in United Passions later expressed regret over the film. Director Albertin called United Passions a disaster and added, "Now I'm seen as the bad guy who brought AIDS to Africa, or the guy who caused the financial crisis. Apparently, I am a propaganda guy making films for corrupt people." Roth apologized for taking part in the film and admitted that he took the job in United Passions for the money. It also received the first Dario Bumstead Award during the 36th Golden Raspberry Awards, a special category for critical and financial failures that were not given an eligible release. Dirty Grandpa, a 2016 comedy film starring Robert De Niro and Zac Efron as a grandfather and grandson going to Florida during spring break, received negative reviews for its gross-out and shock humor that was also considered as sexist, homophobic, and racist. Mike Ryan of Uproxx said, "Dirty Grandpa is the worst movie I've ever seen in a movie theater. Burn it." He later also picked it as the worst film he had ever both reviewed and seen. Pete Hammond of Deadline Hollywood said the film is not just the worst movie De Niro has ever been in, but it may be the worst movie anyone has ever been in. Glenn McDonald of IndieWeek said, "The awful, ugly Dirty Grandpa is the comedy equivalent of torture porn. In fact, in the dizzying moments after being bludgeoned by this miserable specimen, I was convinced it's among the worst movies ever made." Richard Roeper gave the film 0 stars, writing, "If Dirty Grandpa isn't the worst movie of 2016, I have some serious cinematic torture in my near future." On his YouTube channel, Roeper also said,
"I'm not ready to say Dirty Grandpa is the worst movie I've ever seen. I'm also not ready to say it's not the worst movie I've ever seen."
Mark Kermode, on his BBC Radio 5 live show, said that he found the film truly, genuinely horrible, and went on to say, "After Dirty Grandpa, I did feel genuinely unclean. I wanted to go and have a shower because it's just so revolting. Somewhere in hell, there is a multiplex paying this on a double bill with Movie 43 and Entourage." He would later go on to brand it his least favourite film of 2016. Glenn Kenny of RogerEbert.com said, "The actor Bela Lugosi appeared in some landmark, perhaps even great, films at the beginning of this Hollywood career in the 1930s. Lugosi's final film was 1957's Plan 9 from Outer Space, frequently cited as the worst film ever made. The cinematic landmarks of De Niro's career include such films as Coppola's The Godfather Part 2 and Scorsese's Raging Bull. He has been featured in a good number of very bad films in the years since. But this might just be his own Plan 9. The film has an approval rating of 10% at Rotten Tomatoes based on 135 reviews, with an average rating of 3.1 out of 10. But in IMDb's case, it's 5.9 out of 10. Okay then, getting better. While on Metacritic, it has a score of 21 out of 100 based on 27 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. At the 37th Golden Raspberry Awards, it received 5 nominations for Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Worst Screenplay, and two nominations for Worst Supporting Actress, but did not win in any category. Guardians is a 2017 Russian superhero film about a team of Soviet superheroes created during the Cold War. It was criticized for having a derivative plot, bad acting and direction, cheap CGI, plot holes, and overall low quality. KGPortal.ru wrote that Guardians is a film from which Russian cinema should be protected. It's like a sequel to Plan 9 from Outer Space, filmed by Uwe Boll, with the screenplay by Tommy Wiseau and with him in the lead role. Rossiyskaya Gazeta commented that the film was worse than you can imagine. Medusa compared the film's director, Sarek Andreasyan, to Plan 9 from Outer Space's director, Ed Wood, and said that Guardians is a convincing answer to the internal question of why we can never catch up with Hollywood even in our own box office. A Fisher said that it was the Russian answer to Howard the Duck, and Ivy Inc. commented that a more talented film is hard to imagine. Raya Novosti placed it at the top of their worst film list, and Russian review aggregator Kritikanstvo listed it among the all-time lowest-scoring films. Critics outside of Russia generally panned the film, but were not as harsh, as it has a 27% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 11 reviews. A sequel was planned, but the film was a box office bomb, which resulted in the film's production company, Enjoy Movies, subsequently filing for bankruptcy, and the Cinema Foundation of Russia, which provided part of the budget, suing the company and demanding a return of the investment. The 2019 comedy film Lakeisha stars Jeremy Saville, who also independently wrote, directed, and produced the film as Joe, who needs money to pay for his son's private school education, and after getting rejected for a job as a radio host, the Listening For, which encourages women and minorities to apply, gets the job by pretending to be a sassy black woman named Lakeisha, who gives out advice on air. The film's trailer and poster were panned online as racist and stereotypical upon their release, with Entertainment IE's Brian Loy writing that it was one of the sick, worst fucking things we have ever seen, and we still can't believe it's actually real. Upon seeing the film, Nathan Rabin said that the film was somehow much worse than the trailer led people to believe. The film was universally panned by critics, as it garnered a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Joel Golby of The Guardian called the plot one of the more offensive in history, also criticizing its lighting, sound design, and acting, among other aspects of the film, and writing, the worst film ever made, worse than The Room in every way. The 1-star rating it currently has on IMDb is actively generous. I cannot believe this film got made. Dark Kahan of Pop Dust called it genuinely the worst movie he had ever watched, calling Zaville an unbelievable racist, and deeming the movie grotesque, abhorrent, and criminal. For Decider, KB wrote that she wouldn't recommend this film to anyone, living or dead, as it was painfully hard to watch, while also dubbing it the year's most reviled movie. Cats is the film adaptation of the popular musical penned by Andrew Lloyd Webber and directed by Academy Award-winning filmmaker Tom Hooper. The film is about a tribe of cats called the Jellicles as they hold their Jellicle Ball, an annual ceremony where the cats compete for the chance to enter the Heaviside Layer, where the chosen Jellicle will be granted a new life. Lloyd Webber condemned the film as ridiculous, stating, "The problem with the film was that Tom Hooper decided that he didn't want anybody involved in it who was involved in the original show." It was criticized for CGI digital fur technology, which depicted the film's actors as vulnerable cats. An updated version of the film, with a refined CGI patch, was sent to cinemas after its premiere. Describing the experimentation with digital fur as one of the worst decisions in movie history, Rolling Stone wrote, "There are many other problems with Cats, but it was hard for anyone to focus on any of them when it just looked so shitty and disturbing." Other critics also panned the performances of some of the actors, with James Corden and Rebel Wilson receiving the most criticism. As of June 2024, Cats sits at a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. The film won 6 awards out of 9 nominations at the 40th Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Director for Hooper, Worst Supporting Actress for Wilson, Worst Supporting Actor for Corden, and Worst Picture overall. Early reviews for Cats were embargoed. Manohla Dargis from the New York Times commented that a doctoral thesis could be written about how this misfire spun it into existence. British newspaper The Daily Telegraph called the film an all-time disaster, with reviewer Tim Roby giving the film 0 stars in his review. Critics from the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, and the Detroit News wrote that it was a candidate for the worst film of the 2010s, with the Detroit News reviewer Adam Graham writing, "Cats is the biggest disaster of the decade, and possibly thus far in the millennium. It's Battlefield Earth with whiskers." Graham later selected Cats as the worst movie he had ever seen. Wade Major of Cinegods.com slammed it as showgirls with fur, while Battlefield Earth screenwriter J. David Shapiro said Cats had unserved his film as the worst ever made. Cats was included on Time Out's 40 Best Bad Movies Ever Made list. And finally, the decade of COVID-19. Or is it? Anyways, this is what's happening right now, and so far, there's just 3 bad movies to be covered. We're almost done, y'all. 365 Days, aka 365 Dni, is a 2020 Polish erotic romantic drama film directed by Barbara Bias and Tomasz Mendes. It is based on the first novel of a trilogy by Blanka Lipinska. The plot follows a young woman from Warsaw falling for a dominant Sicilian man who imprisons her and gives her 365 days to fall in love with him. It stars Michelle Morone as Don Massimo Torricelli and Anna Maria Siekluka as Laura Beale. The film was released theatrically in Poland on February 7th, 2020, where it was a box office success with an estimated gross of $8 million. It was made available on Netflix on June 7th, 2020, where, despite the negative critical response, it became one of the service's most watched films and gained global attention. The film received overwhelmingly negative reviews for its softcore themes, sexual violence, and mafia glorification. Rotten Tomatoes collected 16 reviews and identified 0% of them as positive, with an average rating of 1.9 out of 10. But as for IMDb's take on the rating, it's given a 3.3 out of 10. Several critics named it one of the worst films. Kevin Maher of The Times said, "There haven't been line readings this poor since the third act of The Room, and it makes the bonking puppets in Team America World Police look like straight-faced documentary." Jessica Kyang of Variety called it a thoroughly terrible, politically objectionable, occasionally hilarious Polish humvathon. In March 2021, the film was nominated for 6 Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Actor, Worst Actress, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, becoming the second foreign language film to be nominated for Worst Picture after Italy's Pinocchio, and only one in the Screenplay category. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is a 2023 low-budget British horror film which reimagines the characters of the series of children's books by A.A. Milne as mutant-slasher villains, released after Milne's work entered the public domain a year prior. It was widely criticised for its premise, alongside lack of humour, poor acting, low-grade special effects, incoherent screenplay, poorly lit scenes, and dearth of interesting characters. Nathan Rabin stated that the film was the regrettable product of a loophole in copyright law that allowed these vultures to twist and distort and corrupt A.A. Milne's beloved icons of gentleness and childhood innocence to their own mercenary ends. Rabin issued his first 0-star review for the film, in which he referenced Roger Ebert's 1994 review of North by stating, "I hated Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey." With a score of 3%, it appears on Rotten Tomatoes' 100 Worst Movies of All Time lists. Screen Rant later places it at the top of their 10 terrible movies you don't have to see to know they're bad list. Sean Paul Wood of the Cinema Spot wrote, "As anyone can tell, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is one of the worst movies ever made, and by the looks of its dazzling lack of antipathy for protecting its copyright, Disney knew it." Matt Valet of Collider wrote, "If these reviews are anything to go by, the film might find itself in a spot of bother as it has been called one of the worst horror movies ever, though some predicted that, from its low quality, the film could garner a cult following similar to Tommy Wiseau's disasterpiece, The Room." It received all 5 Razzies that it was nominated for at the 44th Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture, Screenplay, and Director. Jim Cummings, the current voice actor for Disney's Pooh and Tigger, threatened legal action against the filmmakers if they were to use or imitate his voice for their version of the title character. Okay, last one. Madame Web is a 2024 American superhero movie featuring the Marvel Comics character of the same name, and the 4th film in Sony's Spider-Man universe, or SSU for short, or SSU, a poorly received franchise based on characters and properties associated with the character Spider-Man, who is not prominently featured in it. Set in 2003, the movie depicts the origin story of Cassie Webb, a woman who develops clairvoyant abilities and tries to save 3 young women from Ezekiel Sims, who wants to kill them before they become Spider-Women in the future and kill him. Upon its release, it was widely panned as being an embarrassing mess and meme fodder, with Madame Web being regarded by some commentators as a future cult classic and a camp classic. Many described it as being the worst superhero movie or among the worst comic book movies ever made, including critics from the Daily Beast, USA Today, and the Chicago Sun-Times. Others went further. Josh Korngut of Exclaim called it one of the worst films in recent memory, while Hawaii Tran Bui of Inverse described it as just about the worst movie you'd find at the bottom of that Walmart dollar bin. Fred Tobel of United Press International defined it as bad in ways even debacles like Catwoman and Batman and Robin never broached. David Fear of Rolling Stone panned it as the Cats, the movie of superhero movies, further calling it a genuine Chernobyl-level disaster that seems to get exponentially more radioactive as it goes along. Other critics, such as Sam Adams of Slate, embraced its campy aspects, writing that the movie was a blight on the history of superheroes and cinema itself. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Likewise, Harrison Brocklehurst of The Tab stated that Madame Web was one of the worst films of all time, and yet I loved every stupid second of it. The movie won 3 awards at the 45th Golden Raspberry Awards: Worst Picture, Worst Actress, and Worst Screenplay. Dakota Johnson was not surprised by the film's poor reception, and Sydney Sweeney lampooned its performance. Isabella Merced embraced the film's reception with the various memes surrounding it, and for her enjoyment of other camp films. Lorenzo Di Bonaventura described the film's reception as an axe in your head and a harsher experience, not wanting to experience the brutalness of failure again when comparing the film's low box office performance to its high viewership on Netflix. Sony had reportedly planned for Madame Web to be the first film in a potential new franchise before abandoning these plans due to the movie's critical and commercial failure. So, in conclusion, out of all the movies I've covered, I currently own a few pieces of it on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, or 4K Ultra HD. Examples are Heaven's Gate and Cats. However, I might plan to acquire some more titles that either appeal to me or I don't really know about. Well, that was a lot of fun covering over 100 movies from way back then till now that most critics consider the worst of all time. Clocking in at around 2 hours straight, it was very, very tiring. I promise not to make a 2 to 3 hour long documentary film ever again. The next one will be more shorter. Trust me on that one. So, anyway, would you watch any of those movies shown in the documentary or watch this documentary over and over again? Let me know in the comments. On top of that, this is LJ Network saying, my work here is done, gotta go, and see you later. Oh, and remember, please watch one of my favorite movies of all time, Titanic. Not Titanic, The Legend Goes On. Roll credits! And up next in the Consider the Worst series is...